What's up guys? Welcome to Pervy Hermione. We've got something special today. Harry used a Muggle smartphone at age 7 to livestream every Dursley crime to the entire British government. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The bin and the signal. The phone was cracked down the middle of the screen like someone had thrown it at a wall, which was probably exactly what had happened. Harry found it on a Tuesday in the third week of July, wedged between a split bin bag and a crushed cereal box in the recycling pile at the end of Magnolia Crescent. He'd been sent to take the Dursleys' rubbish out, 4 bags, heavy enough that he'd had to drag 2 of them along the pavement, and he almost missed it entirely. It was the glint that caught him. A sliver of afternoon sun hitting the cracked glass at just the right angle, throwing a tiny rainbow across the grey pavement. He stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then he looked back at the house. Then he picked it up. It was an android. Old model, the cheap kind with a plastic back that had gone slightly tacky with age. The crack ran diagonally from the top right corner to about the center of the screen, but when Harry pressed the power button, more out of curiosity than any real expectation, the screen lit up. Dim, and with a thin dead zone along the crack where the touch didn't work, but lit up. Somebody had forgotten to wipe it. Or hadn't known how. The home screen had a background of a sunset over water, and there were apps arranged in a grid, most of which Harry didn't recognize. He'd seen computers at school. He'd seen Dudley's Nintendo. He'd seen Vernon's enormous television with its remote control thick as a brick. But a smartphone, a proper one, in his hand, turned on, was something else entirely. He looked at the house again. He put the phone in the pocket of his too large shorts and went inside. The cupboard under the stairs was approximately the size of a generous wardrobe. Harry had lived in it for as long as he could remember. There was a cot mattress on the floor, thin as a biscuit, and a single hook on the wall where he hung his school uniform. The spiders who lived in the upper corners had been there longer than he had, and he'd long since decided they were the closest thing he had to pets. He'd named the big one Margaret, after no one in particular. That night, after dinner, which had been a bowl of soup so thin it was basically hot water with ambitions, after washing up, after being told to get out of their sight by Petunia in that particular voice she used when the evening news was about to start, Harry climbed into his cupboard, pulled the door shut behind him, and turned on the phone. No signal, obviously. The SIM must have been deactivated, or there wasn't one. But the Wi-Fi was a different matter. When Harry navigated, slowly, carefully, learning the swipe gestures by instinct and failure, to the settings menu, he found 4 networks. One was called Virgin Media, 7F2A, which was locked. One was called Sky 18543, also locked. One was called Dursley, and Harry sat very still for a moment before he realized he actually knew the password because he'd had to type it into Dudley's Nintendo once when Dudley had screamed at him for 20 minutes until he'd agreed to help. The password was Dudley1 in capitals, which Harry thought said a great deal about Vernon's imagination. He typed it in. The little Wi-Fi symbol appeared in the top corner of the phone's screen. Harry lay on his back on his thin mattress with the phone held above his face and began, methodically and without any particular rush, to learn how it worked. He was 7 years old and he was not stupid. This is worth saying plainly, because people who met Harry Potter at this time in his life, teachers, neighbors, Petunia's friends who came round for coffee and looked through him like he was furniture, tended to assume, based on his too big clothes and his too quiet manner and the slightly watchful way he stood in doorways, that he was either slow or simple or both. He wasn't. He was 7, yes, but he was 7 in the way that some children are 7, already carrying a private interior life so rich and so carefully hidden that it barely showed at the edges. He'd taught himself to read properly at 4, because Dudley had a shelf of picture books he never touched and Harry had long rainy afternoons with nothing to do. He'd learned his times tables by reciting them quietly to Margaret the spider, who never interrupted. He got top marks in every test at school, which caused a problem, because Dudley didn't get top marks and Petunia had very clear views on what happened to boys who caused problems. So Harry had learned to get wrong answers on purpose. Deliberately, carefully, just enough wrong to slide under the threshold. He'd been doing it for 2 years and he hated it with a small, steady, quiet hatred that lived in his chest like an ember. The phone was the first thing in a long time that he didn't have to perform stupidity for. YouTube loaded. Slowly, in pieces, the images assembling themselves over the course of a minute, but it loaded. Harry watched a video of a man explaining how to set up an Android phone from scratch, then watched it again, then did the things the man said. He found the camera app. He found the settings. He found something called Google Assistant that spoke back to him in a woman's calm voice when he typed questions into the search bar, because he was too frightened to speak aloud in case Vernon heard something through the cupboard door. He searched, "What is a smartphone then? How does Wi-Fi work then?" After a pause, "What do you do if someone is mean to you?" The results for that last one were a mixed bag. There were a lot of pages about bullying at school and what to tell your teacher, which wasn't helpful because his teacher was Mrs. Hathaway and she was 72 and had a way of looking slightly past Harry when he talked. There were pages about talking to a trusted adult, which made him laugh silently, which was a thing he'd gotten very good at. Silent laughing. Laughter with all the sound taken out. Then he found a page about something called Childline. And another one about something called Social Services. And another one, which he read 3 times, about what legally counted as child neglect. Harry lay very still on his mattress and read that last page very carefully indeed. He turned the phone off and lay in the dark for a long time. Margaret moved in her web above him, a small patient movement. "I think," Harry said to her, very quietly, "that things might be going to change." He spent the next 3 weeks learning. Every night after the Dursleys were asleep, which he could tell by the pattern of sounds in the house, Vernon's television program ending, the creak of the master bedroom door, Dudley's game console clicking off, Harry would take the phone from where he'd hidden it, inside the split lining of his mattress, and he would learn something new. He learned what a live stream was. He watched other people do them, a woman who cooked dinners and talked to her camera like it was a friend, a boy who played video games and had 40,000 people watching him at once, a man who walked through interesting cities pointing his phone at things. He understood the concept immediately, the way you understand things that slot neatly into a space in your mind that was waiting for exactly them. You pointed the camera at something real, and other people watched it in real time, from anywhere. He learned about something called evidence, from a documentary about courtrooms that played at 2 in the morning on a channel he found while scrolling through the apps. The lawyer in the documentary kept saying it, "We need evidence, we need documentation, we need a record." Harry watched the lawyer's face when she said these things. She looked like someone who'd found a very good stick and knew exactly what she was going to do with it. He learned about safeguarding, from the government website, which was written in the kind of language that assumed you were an adult but contained, if you read carefully, very clear information about what adults were and weren't allowed to do to children in their care. He read the entire page. He read it again. He made a mental list. Then he thought about the mental list in relation to his life on Privet Drive, and the ember in his chest burned a little brighter. August arrived, hot and yellow, and Petunia spent most of it in the garden in a sun hat, and Vernon spent most of it in his armchair watching cricket, and Dudley spent most of it at his friend Piers Pocus's house, which meant Harry spent most of it doing the housework. This was normal. Cleaning, cooking, simple things Petunia had shown him by demonstration rather than instruction, standing behind him and correcting his grip on the mop with a kind of cold precision that wasn't really about the cleaning, gardening, washing up, going to the shop for milk when Petunia couldn't be bothered. Harry was good at all of it. He was good at everything he was allowed to put effort into, which was exclusively the things that served the Dursleys. On the 14th of August, Vernon came into the kitchen while Harry was washing up the breakfast things and told him that he'd broken the garden hose. Harry had not broken the garden hose. The garden hose had a crack in it from last summer that Harry had pointed out twice and been told to mind his own business about. But this was not a thing he said, because he knew already how that conversation ended. "It's going to cost me £40 to replace," Vernon said. He had a way of standing in doorways that took up almost the entire frame. "You'll work it off." Harry kept washing up. Did you hear me, boy? Yes, Uncle Vernon. Vernon made a sound in the back of his throat, not quite satisfied, never quite satisfied, and left. Harry placed a clean mug on the drying rack, reached into the pocket of his too big jeans with a soapy hand, and confirmed that yes, the phone was there, and yes, the camera was still set to the video setting he'd prepared the night before. He'd thought about this carefully. He'd thought about it for most of July and all of the 2 weeks of August so far. He'd thought about the evidence documentary and the government website and the things Childline had said on their page about what you should do if you were being harmed. He'd thought about the 40,000 people watching the video Game Boy. He'd thought about the lawyer with the stick. He dried his hands. He took out the phone and propped it against the fruit bowl that never had fruit in it, just ornamental ceramic apples that Petunia polished once a week, so that the camera faced the kitchen and the doorway into the hall. Then he went back to washing up. He didn't press record. Not yet. He wanted to be sure he'd thought about everything first. He was 7, but he was not careless. He thought about it for another 4 days. The night he finally decided was a Thursday in late August, and what decided it was not a big thing. That's important. It wasn't a dramatic incident, nothing that a casual observer would have necessarily noticed. It was a sandwich. Harry had made the Dursleys packed lunches for a day trip to the zoo, which Harry was not going on, because Harry never went on family outings, and he'd made them in the morning before breakfast, which meant he hadn't eaten. And by 11 o'clock the Dursleys were gone and Harry was in the kitchen having discovered that there was half a loaf of bread that was 2 days from its use-by date and approximately nothing else that he was permitted to eat without explicit permission. He made a sandwich. It was plain bread with a thin scrape of butter because he thought the butter was probably not being monitored. He ate it standing at the kitchen counter. He had just finished when the front door opened, which was impossible because the Dursleys were at the zoo, except they weren't, because Dudley had apparently been sick in the car and Vernon had turned around and now they were back. Harry was still holding the plate. Vernon looked at the plate. Then at Harry. His face went through the specific progression that Harry knew very well: confusion, calculation, conclusions, anger. All in about 2 seconds. Did you just eat our food? There wasn't, Harry started. Did you just help yourself to our food? It was the old bread, I thought. I don't care what you thought, Vernon said, and his voice had dropped to the low register that was somehow worse than shouting. I don't care what you thought, because what you think doesn't matter, does it? Because you are here on our charity, boy, and you will not. He took the plate from Harry's hand. He crossed to the bin. He opened the bin with his foot and dropped the plate in, not through, dropped, deliberate, controlled, and then turned back to Harry. You'll eat when you're told to eat, Vernon said. And you'll be grateful. Do you understand me? Harry looked at him. Just looked. Do you understand me? Yes, Harry said. Vernon left. Petunia appeared in the doorway, looked at Harry, looked at the bin where the plate was, and left without saying anything. Harry retrieved the plate from the bin, washed it, put it back in the cupboard, went to his room, picked up the phone, went into camera settings, confirmed that the Wi-Fi was connected, that the phone had charge, that the microphone was working. Then he spent 4 hours setting up a YouTube channel. Then he spent another hour figuring out how to go live. Then he lay on his mattress and stared at the ceiling and thought about the lawyer with the stick. He pressed go live at 7:43 the following morning. It wasn't fancy. He was 7 and he had a cracked phone and he wasn't going to stand in front of the camera and explain himself, because that wasn't the plan. The plan was simpler and more honest than that. The plan was, he set the phone up somewhere it wouldn't be noticed, filming whatever happened, and he let whatever happened speak for itself. The first morning was quiet. Petunia made Dudley's breakfast, the full kind, eggs and toast and juice, and told Harry to have cereal, except when Harry went to the cereal cupboard there was only a box of bran flakes that was nearly empty and slightly stale. He ate those standing at the counter. 23 minutes of that went out live to an audience of, as far as Harry could tell, 0 people. That was fine. He wasn't doing this for an audience. He was doing it for the record. He thought about the evidence documentary lawyer a lot. She'd been very clear about this, the record was the thing. Not people's feelings about it, not their interpretation, not whether they thought it was really that bad. The record was what happened, captured faithfully, available for review. The record was the stick. He moved the phone to different locations throughout the day, always somewhere unobtrusive. The kitchen when he was cooking. The hallway when he was cleaning. The garden when he was weeding, propped against a flower pot with its camera facing back at the house where Petunia sat in her garden chair doing absolutely nothing. He captured the moment Vernon came back from work and bellowed at Harry for leaving a footprint on the kitchen floor. He captured Petunia telling Harry that Dudley's birthday was coming up and that he'd better not embarrass them, in a tone of voice that very clearly communicated what embarrassing them would cost him. He captured the moment Harry's dinner, leftover soup again, was placed on the counter for him after the Dursleys had eaten a roast. He watched the viewer count that night. 12 people. He had no idea how they'd found it. Possibly they'd stumbled across it searching for something else. He read their comments, which were mostly confused. Is this staged? Why is the kid eating alone? Where are his parents? He didn't respond to any of them. He just kept filming. By the end of the first week, he had 107 viewers on any given live. By the end of the second week, 300. He couldn't have told you exactly why it grew. The internet was a mysterious place with its own tides, except that he suspected it was because he never staged anything and never performed anything. There was no commentary. There was no appeal to the camera. There was just a small boy in oversized clothes moving through a house that wasn't his, doing chores that weren't reasonable, eating food that wasn't enough, in a family that wasn't kind. People found that more disturbing than if he'd cried about it. He'd figured they would. The comments were changing. The early ones had been confused or skeptical. By the end of the second week they were something else. People were doing the same thing Harry had done on the government website. They were reading about safeguarding law. They were posting links to Childline in the comments. They were arguing about what they were watching. This is clearly child abuse, this is clearly neglect, someone needs to call someone, with the urgency of people who'd seen something they couldn't unsee and had nowhere to put the feeling. Harry read all of it. He felt, about all of it, a calm that surprised even him. He'd expected to feel frightened. He'd expected to feel something like hope, maybe, or vulnerability. Instead he felt something closer to satisfaction, the kind that came from a job being done correctly. He was building the record. The thing that made it viral, truly, actually viral, not just popular in a specific corner viral, happened on a Wednesday in September, when Harry had been back at school for 2 weeks. He'd set the phone up in the kitchen before school, propped in the gap behind the fruit bowl, and gone to school, and come home to find that Vernon was already there, home early from work, in the kind of mood that had a specific shape that Harry recognized from long experience. The specific shape of a man whose day had gone badly and who needed somewhere to put that. Harry walked in the front door and read the shape of the day in about 3 seconds, Vernon's shoes in the middle of the hallway rather than by the door, Petunia's posture in the kitchen, tight and careful, the television not on when it should have been. He went quietly. He went to the kitchen and began to wash up the lunch things that Petunia hadn't done, because that was usually the right move on days with this shape. Vernon came in. What happened next lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds and covered, in that time, approximately 12 separate incidents that matched the legal definition of emotional abuse and 2 that matched the definition of neglect, including Vernon taking the tea that Harry had poured himself, because he'd made tea for everyone, had carried the tray through, had stood there like someone asking permission to exist, and pouring it down the sink. Deliberately. While looking at Harry. Without saying a word. And Harry looked back at him. Just looked. Quiet and watchful and absolutely, completely unafraid, in the way that you stop being afraid of a thing once you've decided what you're going to do about it. That evening, someone clipped the 4 minutes and 37 seconds and posted it on Twitter. By morning it had 3 million views. By the afternoon of the following day it had 6 million and a hashtag and a journalist at the Daily Mirror who'd spent the morning on the phone to Surrey County Council's Children's Services Department. By that evening, it had reached a parliamentary aide named Cressida Holbrook, who watched it on her phone on the tube home, watched it again, went directly home to her laptop, and sent an email with the subject line urgent to 4 members of Parliament and 1 cabinet minister. Harry didn't know about most of this yet. He was in his cupboard, eating a slightly stale digestive biscuit that he'd found in his coat pocket from school, reading the comments on his video with his face 6 inches from the cracked screen. There were a lot of comments now. A very lot. He scrolled through them calmly, chewing the digestive. Someone please call the police, this poor child. The address is 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. I found it from context clues in the video. If anyone is local, I work in child welfare and what I'm seeing here is textbook emotional abuse with indicators of neglect. My son is 7 years old and watching this is making me physically ill. Harry, if you can read this, you are so brave. Harry, if you can read this, you are so smart for doing this. Harry, if you can read this, I hope you know none of this is your fault. Harry read that last one a second time. He'd known, in an abstract way, that it wasn't his fault. He'd known it the same way he knew things he'd read in books, as information, filed away, accurate but not quite touching anything. Reading it in someone else's words, someone who'd watched and decided it was worth saying to him directly, did something slightly different. Not dramatic. Nothing broke or healed. But something shifted a small amount in his chest. He put the phone face down on the mattress. He looked at the ceiling. He could hear Vernon's television through the floor. I think, he said to Margaret, that it's almost time. The social worker arrived 11 days later. Her name was Ms. Anand, and she was a small, brisk woman with reading glasses on a chain and a clipboard and the specific energy of someone who had seen many things and was not going to be surprised by this one. Harry watched her arrive from the front room window, which he was not supposed to be in, but Petunia was in the garden and Vernon was at work and Dudley was upstairs on his game console. He watched her park her car, careful, neat, parallel to the curb, and walk up the path. He went to the front door before Petunia could come in from the garden. He opened it. Ms. Anand looked at him. He looked at her. Hello, he said. Are you from social services? She blinked. Recovered. I'm a child welfare officer, yes. I'm here too. You're here about me, Harry said. My name's Harry Potter. I'm 7. Do you want to come in? She came in. She stood in the hallway with her clipboard and looked around at the house, the framed photographs of Dudley on every wall, the neat orderly surfaces, the single chair in the corner of the sitting room that was not Vernon's armchair and not Petunia's settee and not Dudley's beanbag, that nobody sat in and nobody had, as far as Harry had ever seen, given a name, and Harry watched her look. Then Petunia appeared from the back garden and everything changed shape. Petunia was good at a certain performance. She'd been doing it Harry's entire life, the performance of a respectable woman doing a selfless thing, taking in her difficult sister's difficult orphan child out of the goodness of her heart. She deployed it now automatically, the way some people reached for their phone when they were nervous. The smile that was almost warm. The posture of someone resigned to inconvenience but managing it with grace. Ms. Anand listened to Petunia for about 90 seconds. Then she said, very politely, I'd like to talk to Harry alone, please. Petunia's smile flickered. He's only 7, he's clearly very capable of speaking for himself, Ms. Anand said. Shall we use the kitchen? They used the kitchen. Harry sat across from her at the kitchen table and she put her clipboard down and looked at him properly, the way adults very rarely did, the way that meant they were actually going to listen to what he said rather than decide ahead of time what they were going to hear. Harry, she said. I've watched some videos that were posted online. Can you tell me about those? Yes, Harry said. I can tell you about everything. He talked for 40 minutes. He was organized about it, he'd been organizing it in his head for weeks, since the very first night with the phone, making mental lists, ordering things chronologically, making sure he knew exactly what he was going to say and in what sequence so that it would be clear. He described every incident he'd captured on the phone. He described many more he hadn't. He was precise about dates where he could remember them and careful to say I don't know exactly when he couldn't. He described the food situation. The cupboard. The chores. The things Vernon said and how he said them. Ms. Anand wrote. She wrote a lot, and quickly, and did not once interrupt him or ask him if he was sure or suggest that he might be misremembering. When he finished she said, "Is there anything else?" "I have the phone," Harry said. "With all the videos on it. I saved all of them locally as well as the live streams. In case the internet ones got deleted." He paused. "I watched a documentary about evidence. You should always have backups." Ms. Anand looked at him for a moment. It was not a pitying look. It was something else, something Harry couldn't quite name, a look that adults sometimes got when they encountered something that didn't fit the category they'd prepared for it. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Harry thought about the glint of afternoon sun on a cracked screen in a pile of recycling. "Since July," he said. She nodded, slowly, and wrote something down. Harry watched her write and felt the ember in his chest burning, not with anger now, but with something that was starting, cautiously, to feel like what he imagined warmth felt like when it came from outside yourself. They took him that afternoon. Not dramatically, there were no police cars, no scene in the street, nothing that Petunia would have to explain to the neighbors with that particular expression she kept for maximum martyrdom. Just a mess. Anand's neat car, and a small backpack with Harry's school uniform and the phone and the book about Roman Britain he'd borrowed from the school library and hadn't finished, and Harry in the back seat watching Privet Drive get smaller through the rear window. He didn't feel the things he'd imagined he might feel. He didn't feel sad, or relieved, or triumphant. He felt, mostly, interested. The way he felt when a book reached the part where the world of the story started to get bigger. Ms. Anand caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "You all right back there?" "Yes," Harry said. "What happens next?" "We're going to find you somewhere safe to stay," she said. "And then there are going to be quite a few more conversations. Some of them with more people than just me." Harry nodded. He looked out of the window at the street sliding past. He thought about the parliamentary aide whose name he didn't know yet. He thought about the journalist from the Daily Mirror. He thought about 6 million views and a hashtag. "That's fine," he said. "I've got a lot to say." In the mirror, Ms. Anand's expression did the same thing it had done in the kitchen when he'd mentioned the backups, that complicated, unnameable look. Harry turned back to the window. The houses of Little Whinging gave way to a roundabout, then a dual carriageway, then open road. He pressed his nose briefly against the glass, the way he'd seen children do in films and had never quite had occasion to do himself. The road opened out ahead of the car, wide and possible, going somewhere he'd never been. Harry Potter sat back in his seat, folded his too-big jacket more neatly across his lap, and waited to see what the world was going to do next. Chapter 2, 47,000 viewers. The foster home was in Guildford, a 20-minute drive from Little Whinging, which felt like a different planet. Mrs. Okafor ran it. She was a large, worn Nigerian woman in her 50s who had been fostering children for 19 years and had developed, over that time, an almost supernatural ability to read what a child needed in the first 10 minutes. What she read in Harry was something she'd seen before but not often, a child who wasn't broken, exactly, but had been operating for so long without anybody's help that he'd simply stopped expecting it. The dangerous kind of fine. The kind that looked okay from the outside because it had learned to look okay. She sat him down at her kitchen table, which was round and big and covered in a yellow oilcloth with a pattern of lemons on it, and she put a plate in front of him without asking what he wanted. It was a ham sandwich. Thick bread, proper butter, a slice of tomato, crisps on the side. Harry looked at it. "Eat," Mrs. Okafor said, already moving back to the counter to make her own tea. Harry ate. He ate the whole thing without speaking and then sat with his hands folded on the table and waited. Mrs. Okafor sat down across from him with her tea in a biscuit tin and said, "My name is Grace. You can call me that or you can call me Mrs. Okafor, whichever sits better with you. There are 2 other children here right now, Marcus who is 9 and Priya who is 12. Marcus is at school still, Priya is upstairs. The rules of this house are, everyone eats together when we can, everyone is respectful, and if something is wrong you tell me directly. I don't like guessing." Harry considered this. "That seems reasonable," he said. Grace looked at him. "How old are you?" 7. "You talk like you're 40. People say that," Harry agreed. She pushed the biscuit tin toward him. He took a digestive and ate it. She drank her tea. Outside, the garden was very green in the late afternoon light, and a wood pigeon was doing something enthusiastic in the apple tree. "Ms. Anand tells me you set up a live stream," Grace said. "Yes. And the government is involved now." "I think so." Ms. Anand said there would be more conversations. Grace nodded, turning her mug slowly in her hands. "There will be. There are going to be a lot of adults wanting to talk to you, Harry. Some of them will be trying to help you. Some of them will be trying to help themselves. Do you know the difference between those 2 things?" Harry thought about it. "The ones helping themselves will want me to say specific things." Grace's mouth curved slightly. "Yes. That's it exactly." She stood up. "You can have the room at the top of the stairs. It has a window that faces the garden. I find children sleep better with a garden view, I don't know why." She paused. "You can keep the door shut whenever you like. In this house, a shut door means knock first." Harry had never had a shut door. He sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," he said, and meant it completely. The conversation started the following week. The first one was with a woman named Dr. Sarah Lee who was a child psychologist and who had a very deliberate, careful way of talking, pauses in the right places, neutral language, the specific vocabulary of someone trained not to accidentally say anything that could be considered leading. She had a small notebook but barely wrote in it. Mostly she listened. Harry told her what he'd told Ms. Anand, in the same order, with the same precision. Dr. Lee listened without interrupting. When he finished she sat quietly for a moment, then said, "How are you feeling, talking about all of this?" Harry considered the question genuinely, because it was genuinely asked. "Organized," he said. Dr. Lee wrote something in her notebook for the first time. The second conversation was with a man named Philip Garrett who worked for the Crown Prosecution Service and who had a very different energy, the energy of a man who needed specific, actionable information and was trying to collect it efficiently. He asked about the videos. He asked about storage, backups, timestamps. He asked Harry to walk him through the legal access to the Wi-Fi. Harry told him the password situation, the discarded phone, all of it, and watched Garrett's face carefully while he talked, the way he'd learned to watch Vernon's face, because faces told you things before words did. Garrett's face was doing something careful and slightly impressed. "The videos are time-stamped automatically," Harry explained. "The phone's clock was accurate because it synced to the network. The Wi-Fi logs would show device connection if you needed further corroboration." He paused. "I read about digital evidence. I thought corroboration would be important." Garrett looked at him. Then he wrote something down. Then he looked at him again. "Harry," he said, "how much of this did you plan?" "All of it," Harry said. "From the beginning. I wasn't sure it would work but I thought it was the right approach." He folded his hands in his lap. "Was it?" Garrett was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, with the slightly subdued quality of a man recalibrating. "It was. The video had done something complicated to the internet, which had in turn done something complicated to the country. Harry found this out in pieces, from Ms. Anand's carefully managed updates, from overheard conversations in Grace's house, from the news on Grace's television in the evenings, which Harry was now allowed to watch for an hour before bed, sitting in the armchair nearest the window while Marcus and Priya fought over the remote. The clip that had gone viral, the 4 minutes 37 seconds of Vernon and the tea, had spawned a wave of secondary coverage. Newspapers had picked it up. Radio shows had discussed it. The hashtag, which Harry eventually learned was "Where is Harry?" had trended for 3 days, then died, then been revived when the Daily Mirror published a piece that included some of the earlier, longer live-stream footage alongside an interview with a child welfare expert who used the phrase "systematic emotional abuse and neglect" with the specific precision of someone who had assessed the footage carefully before speaking. The Dursleys had, apparently, retained a solicitor. Vernon had given a single statement, brief, generic, the language of someone being coached, that described Harry as a troubled child who had misconstrued ordinary household expectations. The statement used the word grateful twice, which Harry noted with a feeling he couldn't quite categorize. It was not quite contempt. It was something drier and more distant than contempt. Petunia had not made a statement. According to Ms. Anand, Petunia had sat in the solicitor's office and not spoken at all, which was apparently somewhat disconcerting for everyone present. Dudley, as he was a minor, was not involved in any public aspect. The parliamentary angle came via a woman Harry had not yet met, whose name he learned from the news. Cressida Holbrook, the aide who'd sent the email, had apparently triggered a response that went further than she'd intended. She'd expected an inquiry, a question in the House, the kind of political machinery that ground slowly and produced occasional official-sounding reports. What she'd gotten instead was a minister who'd watched the clip at home with his wife and his 2 young daughters, whose face had done something that political faces rarely did, which was to stop being a political face for a moment and just be a human one. The minister's name was David Ashworth. He'd requested a private briefing from Children's Services within 48 hours. He'd then gone on the morning news and said, in the careful language of politics but with an undertone of something real beneath it, that the situation was being taken very seriously and that robust action would follow. Harry watched this clip on Ms. Anand's laptop during one of her visits to Grace's house. He watched Ashworth's face. "Do you think he means it?" Harry asked. Ms. Anand considered. "I think he means it right now," she said honestly. "Whether the meaning lasts is a different question." Harry nodded. "That's why the record is important," he said. "The record doesn't stop meaning it." Ms. Anand looked at him with the same complicated expression she'd had in the kitchen at Privet Drive, and then she said something that surprised him. "You're going to be okay, Harry." "I mean that." Harry looked at her. "I know," he said. Not arrogantly, just plainly, the way he said most things. "I've been planning for it." The hearing happened 6 weeks after Harry left Privet Drive, in a room that smelled of carpet cleaner and slightly stale coffee. Harry sat next to a woman named Jennifer Cole who was his allocated solicitor, young, with very straight posture and an expression of focused calm, and across the table from 2 people he didn't know and one that he did, which was Philip Garrett. The people he didn't know were a family court judge named Patel, who was running the preliminary hearing, and a child welfare guardian named Mr. Stevens who had been assigned to independently represent Harry's interests. Harry had read about guardians. He understood what they were for. He sat next to Jennifer Cole with his hands folded on the table and said, when asked to introduce himself, "I'm Harry Potter. I'm 7 years old and I've been in emergency foster care since September." Judge Patel had the kind of face that gave almost nothing away, which Harry respected. "And you understand why you're here today, Harry? You're deciding whether the videos I recorded constitute sufficient evidence for formal proceedings against the Dursleys," Harry said. "And whether my current placement should be made more permanent while that's happening." Patel looked at him. Then at Jennifer Cole. Then back at Harry. "Yes," Patel said. "That's more or less correct." The hearing went on for 2 hours. Harry answered questions precisely and without embellishment, because embellishment was the enemy of credibility, which was something he'd learned from the evidence documentary and also from basic common sense. When Garrett asked him to describe the food situation at Privet Drive, Harry described it. When Stevens asked him how he'd obtained the phone, Harry described that. When someone on a video call, a solicitor representing the Dursleys, with a too smooth face and the energy of someone who believed they could manage this, asked Harry whether he'd ever considered that the videos might present a misleading picture of daily life at number 4, Harry said, "No, because I filmed everything. If there was a misleading picture, it would have to mislead in both directions." A small silence. "What do you mean by that?" the solicitor asked. "I mean if I was trying to make things look bad, I'd only film the bad parts," Harry said. "I filmed everything. The viewer count went up when the bad parts happened. That's not because I arranged it. That's because there were a lot of bad parts." Jennifer Cole made a very small sound beside him that she immediately covered by looking at her notes. By November, the viewer count on the archived live streams had reached 47,000. Harry knew this because Marcus, who was 9 and deeply internet literate in the way of children who'd grown up with tablets and no supervision, had found the channel and shown him during one of their evenings in the sitting room. Marcus had the kind of face that felt everything visibly and quickly, surprise, then fascination, then a complicated sort of solidarity. "This is you," Marcus said, holding up his school iPad. "Yes," Harry said. 47,000 people watched this. More, actually. That's just the archived count. The live numbers were different. Marcus stared at the screen for a moment. He was from Birmingham originally, had been in care for a year, and had the particular shrewdness of a child who'd learned very early that the world was not arranged for his benefit. He and Harry had not spoken much beyond practical house logistics. "You used the last of the cornflakes and Ms. Anand rang while you were in the bath, but something shifted now. Did it work?" Marcus asked. "Like, does it actually do something?" "There's a court hearing," Harry said. "And a minister said something on the morning news. And a journalist is writing a piece." He paused. "It's doing something." Marcus looked at the screen a little longer. "I thought about something like that once," he said. "Not the camera thing. But, like, telling someone. I didn't know how." Harry looked at him. "What happened with you?" And then, because he remembered what Grace had said about the difference between people who help and people who help themselves, "You don't have to tell me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mum's boyfriend. It wasn't the same as yours. But you don't have to tell me," Harry said again. "I know," Marcus said. "But maybe I will sometime." They watched something on the television after that, a nature documentary about the deep ocean that neither of them had picked. It had just been on, and somehow neither of them changed it. The anglerfish with its horrible beautiful light in the darkness of the water. The way things survived down there, adapted to pressure and cold and nothing. Harry thought that was probably something, as a metaphor, but he was tired and didn't feel like working it out. The piece in the Daily Mirror ran in December, and it was not the piece Harry had expected. He'd expected something focused on the legal case, the court proceedings, the safeguarding failure. That was the story, as far as Harry understood stories, the thing that had happened, why it mattered, what came next. And the journalist, a woman named Claire Abbott, had interviewed Ms. Anand and Philip Garrett and a child welfare expert from a university in Cressida Holbrook, the parliamentary aide, and all of that was in the piece. But the piece led with Harry. With what he'd done. Not in a way that made him a victim, she'd been careful about that, had asked him directly what he wanted people to understand, and he'd said that it worked, that there was a way to fight back, that you didn't have to wait for someone to notice, but in a way that made him, unmistakably, the person who'd done something. The headline was, 7 years old and smarter than the system, how one child's smartphone changed everything. The photograph was one Ms. Anand had provided, from the day at the foster home, Harry at Grace's kitchen table with the yellow lemon oilcloth, face turned slightly toward the window, the light coming in at an angle. He looked, in the photograph, like himself. Just himself. A small boy in a too-big jumper, with a face that had something behind the eyes that wasn't quite what you expected. The piece went online at 6 in the morning. By noon it had been shared 90,000 times. By evening the video channel had 312,000 subscribers. Harry read the article on Grace's laptop at the kitchen table while Grace made tea and didn't make a fuss about it, which was one of the things Harry had come to appreciate most about Grace. "Does it say what you wanted it to say?" Grace asked. "More or less." He scrolled back to the beginning and read the first paragraph again. He was 7 years old, and he was not going to wait to be rescued. She understood the main point. Which was? Harry looked up. "That I did it myself. I didn't wait. I found a way." He looked back at the screen. "Because if it looks like something that only works because I was smart or lucky, then other kids think it won't work for them. But if it looks like the thing that worked was the decision, the deciding to do something, then maybe it's useful to more people." Grace put a mug of tea in front of him, which was a thing she'd started doing about 2 weeks in despite him being 7 and not technically a tea drinker, because she'd noticed he always looked at other people's mugs with a kind of wistfulness. He'd turned out to like his tea with enough milk that it was barely tea anymore. "You think about other people a lot," Grace said. "For someone who's had good reason not to." Harry thought about that. I think about systems," he said. "Not just my problem. The problem. Why it happens. What stops it happening." Grace sat down. "And what does?" "Evidence," Harry said. "And someone to send it to who can actually do something." He wrapped his hands around the mug. "The problem isn't that nobody cares. Some people care. The problem is that caring isn't enough without evidence and without leverage. You need all three." Grace was quiet. In the garden, the wood pigeon was back in the apple tree. "Harry," she said. "I've been doing this for 19 years. I've had children here who never figured that out." Harry sipped his very milky tea. "I had a lot of evenings in a cupboard to think," he said. The response to the article included 3 separate things that Ms. Anand brought to Harry's attention in her next visit, which she made at the end of the week. First, David Ashworth's office had contacted Surrey County Council to express the minister's continued interest in Harry's case and request updates. This was, Ms. Anand explained, unusual. "Ministers don't usually personally track individual cases," she said. "But this one has had the kind of public attention that makes ignoring it politically uncomfortable. That's actually useful for you." Harry had suspected this. The political angle was leverage. He'd read enough about how government worked to understand that attention was the mechanism by which private problems became public obligations. "What does he actually want?" he asked. "To be on the right side of it," Ms. Anand said, with the frankness she'd been deploying with him from the start, which he appreciated. "Which, right now, means making sure the case against the Dursleys progresses and that you're being properly supported." "That's useful then," Harry said. "We want the same thing, even if for different reasons." Ms. Anand looked at him with that expression again. He was used to it now. Second, Jennifer Cole had received a preliminary indication from the Crown Prosecution Service that the evidence, the videos, Harry's testimony, the corroborating accounts from his school teachers who had, once formally asked, had quite a lot to say about the state Harry regularly arrived to school in, was sufficient to proceed to formal charges. Neglect, the CPS indicated. Emotional abuse. Possibly more, depending on the fuller evidence review. Harry received this with a nod. He'd expected it. The evidence was good. He'd made sure the evidence was good. Third, there had been letters. Not to Harry directly, they'd come to Ms. Anand's office and to Surrey Children's Services, from members of the public who had read the article. Most of them were expressions of support or outrage or both. Some of them were offers, families who wanted to foster Harry, individuals who wanted to fund a legal trust for him, a woman from Edinburgh who had sent a handmade jumper in a blue that she said matched his eyes, which made Grace laugh for 30 seconds and then go slightly glassy. But one of them was different. It was a letter on heavy cream paper with a crest Harry didn't recognize. It was addressed to Harry James Potter, and it was from a law firm in London that Ms. Onand explained handled, among other things, estate matters. What kind of estate matters? Harry asked. It indicates that your parents, your biological parents, had made provision for you that has not been properly accessed, Ms. Onand said carefully. Their will, apparently, contained stipulations about your care that were not followed. Harry stared at the letter. They had a will. Apparently, yes. And the will said something about where I was supposed to live. Harry sat back. His parents had wanted something else for him. Had written it down. Had tried to make it binding. And somewhere between that letter and a cupboard under stairs, something had gone very wrong that had nothing to do with the Dursleys. Someone made a decision, Harry said. To put me there, even knowing that. It seems that way. Who? We don't know yet. Harry looked at the letter for a moment longer. Then he looked up. I want to go to that meeting, he said. You're 7, Harry, I know. I want to go anyway. With Jennifer Cole. He met Ms. Onand's eyes. This is about me. I should be there. Ms. Onand held his gaze for a moment. Then she wrote something on her clipboard. I'll see what I can arrange, she said. Christmas at Grace's house was a thing Harry had not expected to enjoy and did. It was loud in a way he wasn't used to. Grace's extended family came, cousins and a sister with children who tore through the house like weather events, and the kitchen smelled of things Harry had never encountered before, and Grace put music on, the kind of music that did something to the room, made it feel warmer somehow. Marcus got a new game for his tablet and spent 20 minutes trying to show Harry how to play it, which mostly involved Harry dying immediately and Marcus laughing until he couldn't breathe. Priya, who was 12 and reserved in the way of someone who'd been burned by trusting easily, came downstairs on Christmas morning in pajamas with a book tucked under her arm and sat in the kitchen with Harry while everyone else was still in bed, and they ate toast and she told him about the book, which was about cryptography, and he told her about the evidence documentary, and they had, in total, approximately 40 minutes of the best conversation Harry had ever had. At some point Grace came downstairs and found them both at the table, midway through an extremely detailed discussion of whether digital evidence or physical evidence was more durable in the long term. Grace looked at both of them. Merry Christmas, she said. Merry Christmas, said Harry and Priya simultaneously. Grace made 3 cups of tea, Harry's one almost entirely milk, and sat down with them, and the morning went on like that. Easy. Warm. No performance required. Harry sat in the yellow oilcloth kitchen in Grace's house and ate toast and talked about things he was interested in with people who listened, and understood, probably in the way that you understand things that are very big when they're very close to you, that this was what the whole enterprise had been for. Not the 47,000 viewers. Not the minister's interest. Not the court hearing. This. Exactly this. The right to sit in a warm kitchen and be a person. He was still going to deal with whoever had decided to put him in that cupboard. He was still going to follow the legal case to wherever it went. He was still going to go to that meeting with the law firm. But right now he was 7 years old, and it was Christmas morning, and Grace had made strong tea, and Priya was explaining why the Enigma machine was actually a metaphor for institutional failure, and outside the wood pigeon was making absolute chaos in the apple tree, and Harry Potter was, for the first time in his entire life, somewhere that felt, tentatively and wonderfully, like a beginning. Chapter 3, The Owl and the Offer. The law firm was called Blackwood and Associates, and it occupied the top 2 floors of a narrow Georgian building in Chancery Lane that smelled of old paper and very good wood polish. Harry had been in a lot of buildings since September. Social Services offices, the Family Court, the Crown Prosecution Services waiting room with its plastic chairs and motivational posters. He'd developed a system for reading buildings the same way he read faces, what they were trying to tell you, and what they were actually telling you, and whether those 2 things matched. Blackwood and Associates was telling you it was serious and old and trustworthy. The wood and the paper and the height of the ceilings were doing that work deliberately. Harry looked at all of it carefully as Jennifer Cole led him through the reception area and thought, someone furnished this place to make you feel like the weight of it was on their side. It was good strategy. He filed it away. The man who met them in the conference room was not Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood was 83 and semi-retired, Jennifer had told him on the tube, and dealt now only with certain very specific accounts that had been with the firm for decades. The man who stood up when they entered was named Marcus Webb, a partner, 40-something, with the careful face of someone who'd learned to be unreadable and was now so good at it he probably couldn't turn it off. He shook Jennifer's hand. Then he looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, and the formality wasn't condescending. It was precise. "Mr. Webb," Harry said, and sat down. Webb had a folder in front of him. Thick. The kind of thick that meant years of paper, accumulated. He opened it and arranged 3 documents on the table between them, which Harry looked at directly while Jennifer scanned them with the speed of someone used to reading legal language quickly. "This firm has held the estate documents for James and Lily Potter since 1981, Webb said. "We were engaged by a third party at their request as a matter of some delicacy. It was their understanding that certain protections existed for their son in the event of their deaths. It is our position that those protections were not properly enacted." "Someone ignored the will," Harry said. Webb paused fractionally. "The will's directives regarding guardianship were overridden, informally, in favor of a private arrangement." "By whom?" Another fractional pause. "That's what we've been trying to establish for some time. The arrangement appears to have been made verbally, by a third party who represented himself as having authority over the matter. The Dursleys were not, in fact, the legally preferred guardians." Harry looked at the documents on the table. His parents had names written in them. James Harold Potter. Lily Jane Potter. The dates, 1981, were before he'd been born, almost, before everything. They'd sat in this building for his entire life, waiting. "What did the will say?" Harry asked. "About where I was supposed to go." Webb drew one of the documents closer and read from it directly. "In the event of our deaths, guardianship of our son Harry James Potter is to pass to Sirius Orion Black, or in the event of his incapacity or unwillingness, to Frank and Alice Longbottom. Placement with Petunia Dursley née Evans is expressly excluded by mutual agreement of both parties." Webb looked up. "Expressly excluded. Those are the words." The room was quiet. Jennifer was writing something very quickly on her notepad. Harry looked at the document. He thought about the cupboard. The thin mattress. Margaret the spider. The 4 minutes and 37 seconds of Vernon and the tea. He thought about all of it as a thing that was not supposed to have happened, that had been tried to be prevented by 2 people who'd loved him enough to write it down before they died, and something moved through him that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and was something between the two, something that didn't have a name yet. "Sirius Black," he said. "Where is he?" Webb and Jennifer exchanged a look. "Mr. Black was imprisoned," Webb said carefully. "In 1981, shortly after your parents' deaths. He has been in Askander, in a high-security facility, since that time." "Was he convicted?" Another fractional pause. "There was no trial," Webb said. The thing without a name moved through Harry again, colder this time. "He was imprisoned without a trial. The circumstances of 1981 were irregular. There was a great deal of civil disruption, and certain legal processes were expedited or set aside. There was no trial," Harry said again, not as a question, just making sure the fact was sitting correctly in the room. "And Frank and Alice Longbottom? Also incapacitated. Since 1981. They are in a long-term care facility." Harry sat very still. The whole shape of it was becoming visible, not just his own situation but a wider thing, a shape of events that had a catastrophic year at its center and had rippled out from there, affecting more than just him, more than just his cupboard and his thin mattress. His parents had tried to protect him, and the protection had failed because of someone who'd had no legal authority and had exercised it anyway. And Sirius Black, whoever he was, whatever had actually happened, had been sitting in a prison without a trial for his entire life. "I want to know who the third party was," Harry said. "The one who made the arrangement." "We've been unable to establish that definitively," Webb said. "The trail leads to a point where the records become incomplete. Someone removed them. That would be our assessment, yes." Harry looked at Jennifer. She looked back at him with the focused, calm expression he'd come to read as her working face, the one that meant she was already 3 steps ahead in cataloging what they needed. "We need Sirius Black's trial records," Harry said to her. "Or the absence of them." "Already on my list," Jennifer said. "And someone needs to look at Frank and Alice Longbottom. Whether what happened to them is connected." "Also on my list." Harry looked back at Webb. "What does the firm need from me?" "We need you to formally acknowledge the estate claim," Webb said. "And to, frankly, Mr. Potter, allow us to do what we should have been able to do in 1981. Which is to properly advocate for your interests." "You said you were engaged by a third party at my parents' request," Harry said. "What third party?" Webb's careful face did something almost imperceptible. "Your parents operated in certain circles that had their own infrastructure. The engagement came through a representative of that infrastructure. Someone who seems to have been connected to both your parents and to the man who subsequently overrode the will's directives." Harry looked at him steadily. "Was the third party the same person?" Webb said nothing, which was, Harry had learned, its own kind of answer. He sat back in his chair and thought about everything in this room. 2 sets of dead ends, both from 1981. Someone with enough authority to override a legal will and enough access to remove records and enough power to imprison a man without trial. And a law firm that had been sitting on all of this for 9 years, apparently unable or unwilling to push it forward until a 7-year-old had accidentally made himself newsworthy enough that ignoring him was no longer viable. "Why now?" Harry asked. "You've had this folder for 9 years. Why did you contact me now?" Webb held his gaze. "Because now you're visible," he said. "And because we believe the same individual who overrode your parents' wishes may have been hoping you'd remain invisible." Silence. "Then I'll stay visible," Harry said. Spring arrived and Harry turned 8 in a kitchen full of people who'd bothered to notice, which was still new enough to feel remarkable. Grace made a cake, chocolate, with 8 candles, and a slight lean to the left because the oven ran hot on one side. Marcus and Priya were there, and Ms. Anand had come with a card, and Jennifer Cole had sent a book about the history of English common law that Harry tore through in 4 days and that Priya borrowed after him. Grace's sister came with her children, the weather event cousins, who crashed through the house and ate most of the cake and then fell asleep in the sitting room in a pile like puppies. Harry sat at the table with the remains of the cake and thought about being 8. It didn't feel substantially different from being 7, except that he knew more now and had slightly better access to people who could act on what he knew. He'd had the meeting at Blackwood and Associates and it had produced 3 things, a formal estate claim, a legal inquiry into Sirius Black's imprisonment, and a contact at the Ministry of Justice who Jennifer was now corresponding with about the absence of a trial record. He'd also started at a proper school in Guildford in January, St. Catherine's Primary, which had a library with actual books in it and a teacher named Mr. Farrow who had the revolutionary approach of simply letting Harry read whatever he wanted and then arguing about it with him afterward. Mr. Farrow was 32 and had done a history degree before his PGCE and had absolutely not expected to find himself in passionate disagreement with an 8-year-old about the long-term political consequences of the Magna Carta, but here they were, twice a week at lunch, and Harry thought it was the best thing about Tuesdays and Thursdays. He got full marks on everything without having to hide it. That alone was worth a great deal. The letters started arriving in August, the summer Harry turned 9. The first one came on a Tuesday, addressed in green ink in an elaborate copperplate hand to Mr. H. Potter, the front bedroom, Mrs. Okafor's foster home, Guildford, Surrey. Which was so specific, and so strange, and contained enough detail that Harry spent a moment just looking at the envelope before he opened it. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper, different cream from Blackwood and Associates, more textured, with a faint watermark, and a crest at the top, a large H surrounded by 4 animals, a lion and an eagle and a badger and a snake. Underneath the crest, in the same green copperplate, were the words Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry read the letter. Then he read it again. Then he set it down on the bed. He had a proper bed now, with a window that faced the garden, as promised, and looked out at the apple tree where the wood pigeon was doing its usual thing, and thought, with the particular quality of thought that came when something large and fundamental shifted, oh. So that's what the rest of it is. Because the letter explained a thing, or began to explain a thing, that had needed explaining for as long as Harry could remember. Odd things happened around him. Had always happened. A teacher who'd been cruel to him had found her car wouldn't start for 3 days running. A boy at school who'd cornered him behind the gym had subsequently developed an unexplained and medically baffling inability to tie his shoes. Once, when he'd been very cold in the cupboard and had wished with his entire body for warmth, the boiler had come on despite Vernon having turned the heating off at the thermostat. These things happened and Harry had noted them, catalogued them, filed them under unknown mechanism, investigate later. This letter was the later. He picked it up and read it a third time, more slowly. It was an offer of a place at a school, a boarding school, starting at age 11. The letter described Hogwarts as a school for witches and wizards. It listed things he would need, books, a wand, robes, a cauldron. It said a representative would be in contact. Harry thought about the third party who'd overridden his parents' will. He thought about the person Webb couldn't name, whose trail went cold at a certain point. He thought about his parents, James and Lily Potter, who had operated in certain circles with their own infrastructure, as Webb had put it. He thought about that word, circles. He picked up the pen from his desk and wrote a note to Jennifer Cole. Then he wrote a separate note to Mr. Webb at Blackwood and Associates. Then he wrote a third note, which he addressed to the return address on the Hogwarts letter, a place called Hogsmeade, and which said, very simply, I have received your letter and have some questions before I agree to anything. Please advise on how best to arrange a meeting. He went downstairs and found Grace in the kitchen. I've had a letter, he said. I know, Grace said, which was unexpected. Harry looked at her. You knew about, not the details. She turned from the counter. I've known there was something different about your situation for a while, Harry. Ms. Anand and I both have. Things that didn't quite add up. She paused. I didn't want to push. Things that didn't add up how? Grace set down the wooden spoon she'd been holding. Your parents' file, she said carefully. There are blanks in it. Big ones. Official documentation doesn't usually have blanks like that unless someone's been through it and removed things. Ms. Anand noticed it early. We couldn't get anyone to explain it. She met his eyes. And there have been 2 occasions since you came here where things happened. In the garden. Once with the apple tree, when those boys from down the road were bothering Marcus. Harry remembered that. He hadn't known she'd seen it. The apple tree moved, Grace said. The branches. When there wasn't any wind. And those boys left very quickly. She picked up the wooden spoon again. I didn't say anything because you were settling in, and because whatever was happening, you were safe, and that was what mattered. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I think it might be about to get more complicated. I assumed, Grace said, and stirred whatever was in the pot. Dinner in 20 minutes. Tell me properly afterward. The representative arrived 4 days later. He was not what the letter's formal copperplate had suggested. He was enormous, 6.5 feet at least, with a beard that seemed to be attempting to occupy its own postcode, and hands that made the front gate look like a toy when he pushed it open. He wore a moleskin coat of truly impressive dimensions and carried an umbrella that was propped closed and which had a faint pink tinge to its tip that caught the light in a way Harry filed immediately under investigate. He knocked on the front door. Harry opened it. The enormous man looked down at Harry. His face, under the beard, was kind in a very specific way, the kind that was real and a little awkward and came without polish. He looked like someone who was very good at being warm and very bad at being formal, and who had dressed up slightly for this occasion in the way that made it obvious he didn't dress up normally. "Blimey," the man said, and his voice was deep enough to feel in your chest. "Ye've got your mum's eyes." He stopped. Cleared his throat enormously. "Right. I'm Rubeus Hagrid. Keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. I've come to, talk to me about the school," Harry said. "Yes. I got the letter." He stepped back. "Would you like to come in?" Grace made tea. Hagrid blinked. He had expected, Harry thought, a different kind of child. He'd prepared for a particular kind of visit, the revelation visit, the Eurowizard Harry visit, built around a child who didn't know, who would need the world explained from the beginning. He hadn't prepared for a child who stepped back from the door and offered tea with the calm of someone who'd been expecting this conversation and had questions ready. He came in anyway. Grace appeared from the kitchen, looked at Hagrid, all of him, the full 6.5 feet and the beard and the coat, and said, without missing a beat, "I'll get a bigger cup." They sat in the sitting room, Hagrid taking up most of the sofa and holding his tea in both hands like it was an espresso cup, and Harry sat in the armchair by the window with his questions. "Before we talk about the school," Harry said, "I want to know some things." Hagrid looked at him with genuine warmth and the beginning of genuine uncertainty. "Right. Course. What sort of things? Who put me with the Dursleys?" The warmth in Hagrid's face went through something complicated. He set down his tea very carefully. "How d'ye know? My parents will said I shouldn't go to the Dursleys. Someone made that decision anyway. Without legal authority. I want to know who." Hagrid was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands. Then at Harry. The uncertainty in his face had become something that was, Harry thought, actually respect, not the automatic, slightly anxious respect people sometimes showed him because of the court case and the news articles, but something more genuine than that, a recognition between one honest person and another. "Dumbledore," Hagrid said. "Professor Albus Dumbledore. He's the headmaster at Hogwarts. He thought it was for the best. That yet be safer with your mum's family, on account of, certain protections. Blood magic, like." He paused. "He's a great man, Professor Dumbledore. He was doing what he thought was, he overrode a legal will," Harry said. "Without authority. And he did it without a trial record for Sirius Black, without telling anyone at Blackwood and Associates what he was doing, and without any apparent consideration of what my parents actually wanted." Hagrid looked stricken in the specific way of someone who cares about multiple things that are now in conflict with each other. It was complicated, Harry. At the time, everything was, there was a war. People were scared. He was trying to protect ya. "I know," Harry said, and meant it. I don't think he's a villain. I think he made a decision that he thought was the right one, and it wasn't, and he didn't have the authority to make it. Those things can all be true at the same time." He looked at Hagrid directly. "Is Sirius Black actually guilty of whatever he was imprisoned for?" Hagrid's mouth opened. Closed. He picked up his tea again, then set it down. "I don't know," he said, which was, Harry thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to him on this subject. I always thought, but there was never a trial, was there?" "No," Harry said. "There wasn't." Another silence. "You're not what I expected," Hagrid said. "People keep saying that." Harry's mouth curved slightly. "What did you expect?" Well. A kid that didn't know anything, like." That I'd have to explain it all to. Did Dumbledore tell you to explain it all to me? Yeah. He said you didn't know about the magical world. That yet been raised Muggle. Hagrid scratched his beard. He doesn't know about the phone business, does he? Or the court case? He paused. Does he? I'd imagine he knows now, Harry said. Since it was on the morning news. Hagrid made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan, and Harry found he liked him unreservedly in that moment, the guilelessness of it, the genuine discomfort of a man who was loyal to someone he respected and was discovering that the picture was more complicated than he'd been given. Tell me about the school, Harry said. The real version. Not the version where you explain it to a child who doesn't know anything. Hagrid looked at him. Then his whole face did something that the warmth underneath the beard finally broke fully through, and he smiled properly for the first time. Right, he said, and picked up his tea. Right, well. It's a castle, to start with. They talked for 3 hours. Hagrid told him about Hogwarts, the castle, the grounds, the lake, the forest that wasn't for students. He told him about the 4 houses, about Quidditch, about the subjects. He told him about wands and Diagon Alley and Gringotts and the goblins who ran it, and Harry listened to all of it with the same focused attention he gave to everything, asking questions at regular intervals that made Hagrid laugh and occasionally go quiet and once say, admiringly, "That's a good question, actually, I don't know the answer to that one." Harry told Hagrid about the phone, about the live stream, about the court case and Jennifer Cole and Mr. Webb and Blackwood and Associates. He told him about Mr. Farrow and the Magna Carta argument and Priya's cryptography book. He told him about Marcus and the evenings watching deep ocean documentaries and the wood pigeon in the apple tree. Hagrid listened to all of it with his enormous hands wrapped around his repeatedly refilled cup and his face doing a series of things, wonder, and sadness, and something that was a specific kind of guilt that Harry recognized as belonging to someone who'd been adjacent to a wrong they hadn't known how to correct. Hagrid, Harry said eventually. What do you know about my parents? Not the official version. The actual version. Hagrid was quiet for a moment. I knew M, he said. Not well, but, I knew M. Your mum was brilliant. Brightest witch of her year, people said, but that made it sound like a competition, and she wasn't. She was the kind of person who made you feel like you could do things. Like you were capable. Your dad was, loud. He smiled. In a good way. Took up space. Made everything feel bigger than it was. He looked at Harry. You've got her way of looking at things. Like you're seeing all the way through to the back of it. Harry absorbed this. He turned it over the way he turned over important things, carefully, completely, setting it down from different angles to see what it looked like. His parents had been real people. He'd always known that technically, but Hagrid's voice made them real in a different way. Made them warm and flawed and human, the way people were. Thank you, Harry said. Fair what? For telling me about them. People don't, usually. They say they were great, they were wonderful, they died heroically. Nobody tells you they were loud or that they made you feel like you could do things. Hagrid looked at him for a long time. I'm sorry, he said. About all of it. About, the Dursleys, and, I'm the one who brought ya there, on Dumbledore's orders, and I've thought about that, I didn't know what it'd be like, and I know, Harry said. You were following instructions from someone you trusted. I don't blame you for that. A pause. Blame's not really what I'm interested in, anyway. It's accountability. Those are different. Hagrid blinked. Blame is emotional, Harry said. Accountability is structural. I want the structure fixed. I want the things that went wrong identified so they can't go wrong the same way again. He looked at Hagrid. Does that make sense? Yeah, Hagrid said slowly. Yeah, it does. He paused. Are ye going to tell Dumbledore all this? Absolutely, Harry said. I have quite a lot of things to tell Dumbledore. The question of whether to go to Hogwarts at all was one Harry sat with for 2 days. He went through it methodically the way he went through everything. The reasons to go were clear enough. It was the world his parents had belonged to, the world that explained the things that happened around him, the world that contained whatever it was that had shaped his life before he was old enough to shape it himself. Going was the only way to understand it from the inside. The reasons to be cautious were equally clear. The school was run by a man who had made a significant decision about Harry's life without authority or accountability. The school existed in a world that appeared to have its own legal and governmental structures entirely separate from the Muggle systems Harry now had relationships within. Going meant entering a new system without his usual leverage, without Ms. Anand, without Jennifer Cole, without Webb at Blackwood and Associates, without the 47,000 viewers. He talked to Grace about it on the second evening. If something went wrong there, he said, I'd have less recourse. What kind of wrong? I don't know yet. That's the problem. He looked out at the garden. In the Muggle world, I know how everything works. I know who to call and what to say and what the legal framework is. In the other world, I'd be starting from nothing. So learn how it works before you go, Grace said. Harry looked at her. You have 2 years before you'd need to be there, Grace said. You've spent the last 2 years learning how this world works from the inside. So spend the next 2 learning how that world works. She paused. Are there books about it? Harry thought about what Hagrid had said about Flourish and Blots, the bookshop in Diagon Alley. Yes, he said. Then that seems like where to start. Harry looked at her for a moment. Grace had the specific quality of wisdom that didn't announce itself, that arrived in plain sensible sentences that turned out to be exactly right. He'd noticed it in the first week and had been grateful for it ever since. I'm going to write to Dumbledore, Harry said. Before I agree to anything. Good, Grace said. And tell Jennifer. In case you need the Muggle legal framework to be adjacent, somewhere close by. She's going to find this extraordinary, Harry said. She's going to find this extraordinary, Grace agreed. But so did you, and you handled it. The letter to Dumbledore took 3 drafts. The first was too confrontational. The second was too accommodating. The third was what he meant, direct, factual, respectful without being deferential. He outlined what he knew about the will, about Sirius Black, about Blackwood and Associates. He asked specific questions. He said that he intended to attend Hogwarts and was writing to establish the terms of that attendance clearly between them from the start. He said that he expected honesty, the full kind, not the kind that left things out. He said he understood that Dumbledore believed he'd been acting in Harry's best interests in 1981 and that Harry's position on that would depend on what Dumbledore said next. He sent it with a school owl, because Hagrid had brought one when he'd left, a beautiful barn owl who sat on Harry's windowsill and looked at him with enormous amber eyes that contained exactly as much judgment as Harry suspected. Take it to Dumbledore, Harry told her. And wait for a reply. She ruffled her feathers once, very regally, and went. Harry watched her disappear into the evening sky and thought about the 9-year-old that he was, in a foster home in Guildford, who had a solicitor and a law firm and a court case and 47,000 archived viewers and an estate claim and now, a direct line of correspondence with the headmaster of a school for witches and wizards. He thought about the glint of afternoon sun on a cracked screen in a pile of rubbish. Every single thing, every one of the things that had changed, traced back to that glint. To the decision he'd made standing at the end of Magnolia Crescent with 2 bin bags and the specific quiet fury of a child who'd had enough. He turned from the window and picked up the stack of books Hagrid had left him, Fantastic Beasts, A History of Magic, the Standard Book of Spells Grade 1 that he wasn't supposed to have for 2 more years, and sat cross-legged on his bed and began to learn. Dumbledore's reply arrived 6 days later. It was 3 pages long. Harry read it twice, noted what it said and what it didn't say, and wrote to Jennifer Cole and Mr. Webb before he went to sleep. Then he lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and thought about a castle. A lake. A forest. For houses named for qualities. A world that had been there his entire life, running parallel to this one, full of people and history and politics and power and all the ways those things went right and wrong. He thought about going in there with his eyes open. He thought that was probably the only way worth going in. Through the window, the owl was back on her sill. He'd named her in the last week, without quite meaning to, the way you name things that come to stay. Claus, he'd called her, after the evidence documentary lawyer. Grace had laughed for a full minute when he'd told her. Claus preened her wing with serene indifference to the significance of the moment. Harry reached over and turned off the light. Chapter 4, The Man with the Motorcycle. Dumbledore's reply had been 3 pages of the most elegant non-answers Harry had ever encountered. He'd read it enough times to have most of it memorized, which wasn't something he tried to do, it had just happened, the way things did when a text was worth studying. The calligraphy was extraordinary, each letter formed with the kind of precision that suggested a man who'd been writing for a very long time and had decided somewhere along the way that the writing itself was a form of thought. The language was warm and unhurried and full of the specific quality of someone who was choosing every word with extraordinary care. What it said, across 3 pages, was, "I am glad you are well. I am glad you wrote. I owe you more honesty than I have previously provided, and I intend to provide it. The matters you raise regarding your parents' will and Sirius Black's imprisonment are ones I have thought about with great frequency over the past 9 years and which I should have addressed more directly. I would very much like to meet with you, on whatever terms you feel appropriate, at your earliest convenience." What it didn't say, why he'd done what he'd done. Any specific acknowledgement of wrong. Anything about the person he'd removed from the records, the trail Webb couldn't follow. Harry had read that absence carefully. Dumbledore was smart, obviously, clearly, the language alone told you that, and smart people didn't leave things out by accident. They left them out because saying them cost more than they were currently willing to pay, or because they needed to see you first, to take your measure, before they decided how much to give. Harry could respect that as a strategy. He could also prepare for it. He'd written back and proposed a meeting in London, at Blackwood and Associates, with Webb and Jennifer Cole present. Not to gang up. Not to intimidate. But because this was his world, the one he'd built, the one where he had weight, and it seemed important to establish that clearly before entering Dumbledore's. Dumbledore had agreed to every condition without negotiation, which told Harry something too. The meeting was in April, in the same conference room with the serious furniture and the old paper smell. Webb was there with 2 colleagues. Jennifer was there with a small recorder she'd asked permission to use and which Dumbledore had granted with a nod that suggested he found the whole apparatus either charming or useful. Ms. Anand was there as Harry's welfare officer. Grace had driven Harry up on the train and was sitting in the reception downstairs with a book and, apparently, absolute confidence in Harry's ability to handle this. Dumbledore came in and Harry stood up and they looked at each other for the first time. Harry had prepared himself intellectually for Hagrid's descriptions, for the wizarding world's apparent way of doing things where clothing and presentation were concerned, but Dumbledore in person was still something to absorb. Tall, though not as tall as Hagrid, but the kind of tall that had presence rather than just height. Silver hair and beard, both long. Half-moon spectacles. Robes that were a deep midnight blue covered in small silver stars that moved, very slightly, when he breathed. His eyes were blue, pale and clear, and they found Harry with the specific quality of attention that Harry had only encountered in a handful of adults, Grace, Jennifer when the case was at its most complex, Hagrid in his guileless honest way. The quality of genuinely looking, rather than checking. Harry met his eyes and held them, because that was the honest thing to do. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "Please sit down." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression, something quick and complicated that Harry filed away. Not amusement. Not discomfort. Something older and more considered than either. He sat down. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes and covered, in that time, more ground than Harry had expected. Dumbledore was honest. That was the thing. Not fully, not about everything. There were moments where he chose his words with the same extraordinary care as his letter, where Harry could see the edge of what was being left out, but honest in the ways that mattered, which was more than Harry had been certain of getting. He acknowledged that the placement with the Dursleys had been his decision alone. He acknowledged that it had not been legal, by wizarding or Muggle standards, and that he had no defense for that beyond the fact that he had believed the blood protection to be critical and had convinced himself that critical was the same as right. He said this without self-pity or excessive self-flagellation, which Harry found easier to receive than either would have been. He acknowledged that Sirius Black had gone to Azkaban without a trial. He said, and here was one of the moments where the careful word-choosing was visible, that he had not facilitated that outcome, but that he had not prevented it. He had believed Sirius guilty. He had let that belief do work that evidence and process should have done. Do you still believe he's guilty? Harry asked. A pause. I have become less certain, Dumbledore said. There is information that has emerged over time that changes the picture. What information? That what I believe to be Black's crime may have been carried out by someone else. A third man, who was believed dead but who I have reason to think is not. Webb looked up sharply. Jennifer's pen stopped moving. Peter Pettigrew, Harry said, because he'd found that name in the newspaper archives from 1981, had spent an evening pulling apart the reporting, and had noted that the story had a seam in it where the logic didn't quite hold. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was, this time, unmistakably surprise. Yes, he said, quietly. How, the newspaper coverage from November 1981 doesn't make internal sense, Harry said. The witness accounts of what happened in the street, the timeline, the physical descriptions of the explosion, they're inconsistent with the official version. I read it 3 times. He paused. Sirius Black was convicted in the public narrative of killing 12 people and betraying my parents to Voldemort. But the coverage of the street scene doesn't match a man who'd done what he was supposed to have done. It matches a man who was being framed. The room was quiet. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long, steady moment. You are, he said, very much your mother's son. People keep telling me that, Harry said. I'm starting to think she was remarkable. She was, Dumbledore said simply. She was one of the finest minds I have ever had the privilege of teaching. And yes, you are correct about Pettigrew. I believe he is alive, and I believe he was responsible for the crimes attributed to Black. He paused. Finding him is a more difficult matter. That's a conversation for another time, Jennifer said, in the voice she used when a meeting was producing useful information and she wanted to capture it before it moved on. Let's make sure we have the current points formally documented. Dumbledore acquiesced to this with a kind of graceful patience that Harry recognized as the patience of a very powerful person who has decided, for now, to operate within someone else's framework. What Harry recognized more than that, though, was that Dumbledore was watching him the same way Harry was watching Dumbledore. Not suspiciously. With something more like curiosity. The kind that wanted to understand something, not just catalog it. At the end of the meeting, when Webb was gathering his papers and Jennifer was reviewing her notes, Dumbledore turned to Harry and said, quietly, I would like to say something that isn't part of the formal record, if you'll permit it. Harry looked at him. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. Not for strategic reasons. Not because you have solicitors and a public profile and leverage that makes an apology useful. I am sorry because I was wrong, and because you suffered for my wrongness, and because the people who loved you wanted better for you than I provided. He held Harry's gaze. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not sure I've earned it. I simply wanted you to have it. Harry sat with that for a moment. Turned it over. I appreciate that, Harry said finally. I'll think about it. He paused. The accountability is more important to me than the apology. I hope you understand the difference. Dumbledore nodded. I do, he said. And I intend to earn both. Sirius Black's case went to the Ministry of Justice in May. Harry wasn't the one who filed it, that was Jennifer and Webb, doing what they did, with the evidence compiled from newspaper archives and the absence of trial records and a formal letter from Dumbledore that had apparently caused several people at the Ministry of Justice to sit down heavily and stare at their walls for a while. But it was Harry's original identification of the inconsistency that had made it possible, and everyone in the process knew that. He found out about the case's progress in the same way he found out about most things, in pieces, via the people who were managing different aspects, assembled into a full picture by Harry himself. The picture, by May, was, the case had been accepted for review, which was the first step in a long process, and Sirius Black had been formally notified, which meant someone had gone to Azkaban and told a man who'd been imprisoned for 9 years without trial that someone was looking at his case. Harry didn't know what that notification would mean to Sirius Black. He tried to imagine it. He sat on his bed with the window open and the smell of Grace's garden coming in, cut grass, something flowering, the wood pigeon being ridiculous, and he tried to imagine what it felt like to be told, after 9 years, that someone had noticed. He thought he had some idea. Summer arrived, and with it, Diagon Alley. Hagrid came back in July, this time wearing something that was technically a suit in the way that a mountain is technically a hill, and they took the tube to London and walked to a pub called the Leaky Cauldron that was on Charing Cross Road and that Harry had walked past on school trips without ever seeing it, which was its own interesting thing to think about. Inside, Hagrid was greeted with warmth from approximately everyone present, including a very small man with a pointed hat who burst into tears when he saw Harry and had to be gently redirected by Hagrid toward the bar. The Leaky Cauldron smelled of old wood and something herby and complicated, and the people in it wore things that suggested the wizarding world's relationship with fashion had developed entirely separately from the Muggle world's and had reached some very different conclusions. Harry looked at all of it with the careful, interested attention he gave to new environments, mapping exits and entrances out of habit, reading the room. The wall at the back of the pub opened into Diagon Alley the way a puzzle box opened, with the right touch in the right place, and then suddenly everything was different. Harry stepped through into the alley and stood still for a moment. It was, a lot. The buildings were crooked and tall and stacked with signs advertising things he didn't have context for yet. The crowd was dense and various, people in robes of every description, creatures he didn't have names for, owls in cages and cats on leads and one small boy trying to ride something on a leash that looked like a very small dragon and was almost certainly not a very small dragon. The noise was layered, voices and something that sounded like chiming and somewhere far ahead what was possibly an explosion, though nobody seemed concerned about it. Right, Hagrid said, looking down at him with the warmth of a man sharing something he loved. This is it. What do ya think? Harry looked up the length of the alley. I think it's going to take some time to learn properly, he said. Which direction is Gringotts? Hagrid laughed, the big full-chest laugh that was one of his best features. Straight ahead. Can't miss it, it's the big white buildin'. But, he hesitated. Yeri not, it's a lot, innit? For a first time. It's a lot, Harry agreed. I like a lot. He started walking. Come on. Tell me everything about the goblins before we get there. Hagrid fell into step beside him, which required some adjustment given that one of Hagrid's steps was approximately 3 of Harry's. He told Harry about goblins, their history, their relationship with wizards, the treaty that governed Gringotts, the way they felt about magical objects and their contempt for wizard social hierarchies. Harry listened and watched the alley as they walked, reading it the way he'd read Blackwood and Associates and every other building he'd entered in the last 2 years. What it was trying to tell you versus what it was actually telling you. What Diagon Alley was actually telling you, Harry thought, was that this was a world that had developed in parallel for centuries without ever needing to justify itself to anyone outside its own borders. It had confidence in itself the way old things had confidence, not aggressive, just settled. It had no idea that the thing it would need most, eventually, was accountability, because accountability had never been required before. Harry filed that thought away. It felt important. Gringotts was exactly as Hagrid had described, enormous, white, staffed by goblins who moved with the brisk efficiency of people who found the concept of inefficiency personally offensive. The vault visit was handled by a goblin named Griphook, who had taken a look at Harry's key, then at Harry, then at the key again, and had asked him, in a voice like gravel on a metal surface, whether he was the Potter who had been on the news. "Yes," Harry said. Griphook looked at him with eyes that were calculating and, Harry thought, not unfriendly. The coverage was useful, Griphook said, which from a goblin, Harry suspected, was a great deal. The vault was, well. It was a vault, underground, accessed by a cart ride that was the most fun Harry had ever had on transport, and it was full of gold coins and silver coins and bronze coins and several interesting objects Harry didn't touch because he'd read enough about wizarding artifacts to know that touching unidentified magical objects without context was the kind of decision you made exactly once. The gold coins were galleons, which Hagrid explained, and Harry did some mental arithmetic about conversion rates that he'd need to look up properly later. He took what Hagrid suggested for the first year's supplies. He thought about the vault as they rode back up and what it represented, resources his parents had accumulated and preserved, sitting in the dark below a bank, waiting. A physical expression of a life that had been lived and interrupted. He didn't feel overwhelmed by it. He felt, instead, a sense of weight and responsibility settling onto him that was familiar, because it was the same kind he felt about the court case, about Sirius's appeal, about every piece of the larger picture. These were things that mattered. You treated things that mattered with appropriate seriousness. Shopping for school supplies was, functionally, wonderful. This was not something Harry had anticipated as strongly as the vault visit or the goblin conversation, but Flourish and Blots was an experience he was not fully prepared for. It was a bookshop the way that a mountain was a landscape, technically accurate but missing the critical sense of scale. Books were everywhere, shelved, stacked, piled, some of them moving, one small section where the books appeared to be having a heated disagreement with each other and the one on the end kept trying to bite people. Harry spent 40 minutes in Flourish and Blots and bought the required texts and 12 more, which Hagrid paid for without commentary beyond a low whistle at the total, and which Harry promised to pay back from his vault at the earliest opportunity, which Hagrid waved off in the way of someone who finds the idea of a 9-year-old paying him back slightly absurd. The wand was different again. Ollivander's was narrow and dim and smelled of something warm and sharp that Harry couldn't quite name. The wand maker was an old man with pale eyes who moved through the stacks with absolute certainty, pulling boxes from places Harry hadn't seen him reach, opening them, holding wands out for Harry to take one at a time. They went through 11 wands. Harry took each one and, nothing. Or something, but not the right something, a faint warmth, a brief shimmer of light. Nothing that felt like what Ollivander seemed to be looking for. The 12th one was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches. Harry took it and the warmth that ran up his arm was immediate and specific, like recognizing a voice you hadn't heard in years. The air in the shop moved, not dramatically, but definitely, a soft movement, like the room had taken a breath. Curious, Ollivander said, and his pale eyes were doing something complicated. Very curious. Why curious? Harry asked. Because the phoenix whose tail feather sits at the core of your wand gave another feather, Ollivander said. Just one other. The wand that feather sits in, it did great things. Terrible things. He paused. And then it turned on its master. Harry considered this. Voldemort, he said. Ollivander blinked. Then something in his face settled into a kind of relief, as if he'd been waiting to see how Harry received this and Harry had received it the right way. Yes. We don't hear many say the name. Names are just names, Harry said. It's actions that matter. He looked at the wand in his hand. Does it mean something that we share a core? Mechanically? It creates a connection, Ollivander said. Between the wands, and by extension between their users. The specific nature of that connection is, he tilted his head. Unpredictable. What kind of unpredictable? The kind that depends entirely on who is holding the wand, Ollivander said. He studied Harry for a moment. You're the one from the news. Yes. You're very different from what I expected, Ollivander said. I know, Harry said. They had lunch at a small cafe halfway down the alley. Hagrid had a tankard of something that steamed and smelled of iron, and Harry had a sandwich that was made with bread from a wizarding bakery and tasted approximately 4 times better than it had any business being. They sat at a small table and Hagrid told him things, about Hogwarts, about the staff, about a giant 3-headed dog that Harry mentally filed under investigate carefully before approaching, with the energy of someone who loved a place completely and was giving it to someone who would love it properly. Hagrid, Harry said, midway through his sandwich. What can you tell me about the person who is going to try to steal the Philosopher's Stone? Hagrid froze. His tankard stopped halfway to his mouth. His whole face went through something that began as surprise and moved rapidly through several other things before landing on a very specific expression, the expression of a man who had just said something he hadn't said, in response to words he'd heard. How d'ya, he stopped. I never said, you said something in confidence to me last week about something being moved to Hogwarts for safekeeping, Harry said. You said Dumbledore was handling it personally. And the vault at Gringotts, Vault 713, was emptied on the same day we're having this conversation, because you collected something from it this morning before we came. I saw the receipt in your pocket. He paused. The name Philosopher's Stone is mentioned in a history of magic in the context of Nicholas Flamel, and the description of what it does, immortality, unlimited gold, is consistent with something that someone currently very motivated toward continued existence would want. Hagrid stared at him. I shouldn't be, Hagrid said. I never should have, Dumbledore told me not to, I'm not going to tell anyone, Harry said. I just want to know what the threat is. So I can think about it properly. You're 9, Hagrid said, with the specific quality of a man who keeps remembering this and being surprised by it. Yes, Harry said. And? Hagrid looked at him. His face did the same thing it had done in Grace's sitting room, the warmth breaking through, the recognition of one honest person by another, layered now with something more complicated that Harry read as worry. There's someone, Hagrid said carefully. Who's been trying to come back? Who? Yeah, know who I mean. Voldemort. Yeah. Him. There are people at Hogwarts who might be helping him. We don't know who exactly. Professor Quirrell, Harry said. Hagrid's tankard hit the table. It's the Stammer, Harry said. I read the staff bios in Hogwarts, a history. He joined the teaching staff after a year abroad, and the description of what that year did to him maps exactly to the kind of psychological profile consistent with someone who encountered something that fundamentally changed their worldview. Fear does that. Or, something that uses fear as a mechanism. He thought about Voldemort and what he knew of him, pieced together from Hagrid's conversations and Dumbledore's letter and the newspapers from 1981. Or something that offers power to someone who's afraid of being powerless. Hagrid was looking at him with an expression that had stopped going through phases and had settled into something that was just, simply, awe. I could be wrong, Harry said. I'm working from limited information. But I'm going to operate on that assumption until I have reason not to. Harry, Hagrid said. Year 9. You've mentioned that. I'm mentioning it again. Harry finished his sandwich. I know. But I'm going to be 11 in 2 years and then I'm going to be in that school, and I'd rather walk in knowing what I'm walking into than walk in assuming it's safe when it might not be. He looked at Hagrid. You should probably tell Dumbledore what you accidentally told me. I know, Hagrid said miserably. He'll understand. You didn't actually tell me anything. I inferred. Hagrid looked at the table. He's still not gonna be happy. Probably not, Harry agreed. But honesty is better than concealment. I'd have thought you'd know that better than most, given what concealment did to my first 7 years. Hagrid winced. That's fair, he said. That's fair. Also, Harry said, for what it's worth, I think you're one of the most genuinely honest people I've met. The fact that you're uncomfortable right now is evidence of that. Hagrid looked at him. Then his face did a thing it did sometimes, where the enormity of him seemed to soften all at once, like snow under sun. Your mum used to do that, he said. Say something like that, right when you needed it. Harry looked out at the alley. The crowd moved past, various and loud and entirely unaware of the 9-year-old at the corner table who just identified the probable host of a semi-corporeal dark wizard and was now thinking about how to get ahead of it. Hagrid, Harry said. When you go back, tell Dumbledore we need to talk again. Not at Blackwood and Associates this time. On his ground. I want to see Hogwarts. Hagrid blinked. He'll want to wait until you're enrolled, I know. Tell him anyway. Hagrid looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his tankard and drank and set it down with a thoughtful expression. You know what, he said, I think the school's gonna be very different with you in it. I think everything's going to be somewhat different, Harry said. That's generally what happens when you stop letting problems stay hidden. The alley moved around them, bright and strange and full of things Harry didn't know yet, full of things he intended to. He thought about the corridor in Hogwarts that Hagrid had accidentally mentioned. The dog. The stone. The professor with the stammer and the year abroad and the changed face. He thought about walking into a situation fully informed versus stumbling into it unprepared, about every single decision he'd made from the moment he'd found that cracked phone in the rubbish, all of them variations on the same choice, to know, rather than not. To see the thing rather than look away from it. He thought about Voldemort. Half alive, hosted, reaching. The specific desperation of something that refused to stop. He wasn't afraid. That was worth noticing. He checked for fear the way you checked your pockets, methodically, expecting to find something, and it wasn't there. What was there instead was the feeling he got when a problem had become clear enough to address. The feeling that meant, all right, then. Let's work out what to do about this. Claus the Owl was at Grace's house right now, probably destroying something important in her magnificent indifference to human property. Mr. Farrow would be on summer break, probably arguing with someone else about the Magna Carta because he needed an opponent. Jennifer Cole would be working on Sirius Black's case, her pen moving fast. Webb at Blackwood and Associates would be doing whatever Webb did, quietly and relentlessly, in that Sirius furniture building with its old paper smell. Ms. Anand would be writing reports, checking in, holding the whole structural framework together with the competence she made look effortless. All of those people, all of those threads, all of it connected to a decision made by a 7-year-old with a cracked phone and enough quiet fury to know it couldn't go on like this. And now, this. A wand in his room at home. Books he hadn't read yet. A vault full of galleons. A world he was about to enter, fully, with everything he had, ready. Harry Potter drank the rest of his pumpkin juice and thought, 2 more years. 2 more years, and then the castle. He couldn't wait. Chapter 5, Platform 9 3/4. The letter arrived on a Saturday in July, 2 years later, and Harry had been expecting it so precisely that he'd already cleared space on his desk for it before Claus dropped it from her talons with the particular flair of an owl who knew she was delivering something significant and wanted appropriate credit. He was 11 now. He'd grown, which Grace recorded on the kitchen doorframe with a pencil mark every 6 months the way she did for all her children, current and previous. He was still slight, he suspected he'd always be slight, but the 2 big clothes were gone, replaced with things that fit, chosen by himself, a concept that had taken some adjustment to feel normal. His hair was still a disaster. Some things, apparently, were permanent. He read the letter, confirmed it matched what he already knew about the term start, and set it on the desk. Then he stood in the middle of his room and took stock. 2 years. He'd spent them well. The Hogwarts, a history he'd bought in Diagon Alley at 9 had led to 6 other books about wizarding society and law and governance, which had led to correspondence with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement that had been, interesting. They'd responded to his first letter with polite deflection. His second letter, which had referenced specific clauses of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy and asked some pointed questions about how the Wisengamot's judicial process compared to Muggle procedural law, had generated a rather more substantive response. He'd been corresponding with a junior official there named Perkins for 18 months. Perkins seemed to find the correspondence alarming and useful in roughly equal measure, which Harry thought was a reasonable state of being. The Sirius Black Review had progressed. Slowly, bureaucratically, through channels that made Muggle legal process look streamlined, but it had progressed. Jennifer Cole and Webb at Blackwood and Associates were now in formal communication with a wizarding barrister named Aldrich Foss who specialized in the intersection of Muggle and magical law, a niche practice, apparently, one that hadn't had much call before Harry's situation had created a market for it. The review board had convened twice. There was, Foss had written in his last letter, genuine possibility of a full hearing before the end of the year. Harry had written to Sirius Black directly, 3 months ago. He'd sent the letter through Foss, who'd forwarded it through proper channels to Azkaban. He hadn't known what to say, so he'd said the things he knew to be true, that he'd found the inconsistency in the 1981 news coverage, that the review was in progress, that he believed Sirius hadn't done what he was accused of, and that he thought his parents had chosen Sirius as his guardian for good reasons, and that he'd like to meet him properly, when circumstances allowed. He'd received a reply 11 days later, in handwriting that was slightly unsteady but legible, on paper that was thin and slightly damp feeling in a way Harry tried not to think about too much. It had said, Harry. Your father would have been insufferably proud of you. So am I, and I have no right to be yet, but I am anyway. Don't do anything reckless. Harry had read it so many times the paper was soft at the fold lines. He tucked it carefully into the book he was currently reading, the Standard Book of Spells Grade 3, because he'd been working ahead, and went downstairs to tell Grace the Hogwarts letter had arrived. The morning of September 1st had the quality of days that have been imagined so many times that when they actually arrive, there's a moment of strangeness. This is really happening, and it's slightly different from the imagined version, and both the difference and the happening are their own kind of remarkable. Grace drove him to King's Cross. Marcus was in the back seat as well, because he'd asked to come and Grace had said yes in the way she said yes to things, which was without fuss or ceremony. Marcus was 11 now too. He'd been moved to a longer-term placement 6 months ago with a family in Guildford who were, by all accounts, solid people, but he and Harry had maintained the friendship with the steady, undemonstrative loyalty of people who didn't need to constantly confirm it. So it's a real castle, Marcus said, looking out of the window. He knew about Hogwarts. Harry had told him in the way you tell someone you trust with something that matters. Marcus had responded the same way he responded to most things, with a focused, interested shrewdness that Harry had come to rely on as a useful external perspective. Real castle, Harry confirmed. Medieval, from the descriptions. Various modifications over the centuries. And they let kids in it. That's rather the point of it. Seems like a safeguarding nightmare, Marcus said. Harry looked at him. That's exactly what I've been thinking. Grace caught Harry's eye in the mirror. Be careful, she said. And right. Anne, be careful. You said that twice. It seemed worth saying twice. King's Cross was a Saturday morning noise, crowds, pigeons, the smell of coffee and diesel, the board announcing departures in its clicking mechanical way. Harry had his trunk on a trolley, Claus in her cage on top of the trunk, his wand in his jacket pocket. He'd been practicing with it for 2 years in Grace's garden, carefully, working through the theory first and then the application, because that was how he worked best. He was reasonably competent. Not prodigiously so, not yet, but competent in a way built on genuine understanding rather than intuition. He knew what Platform 9 3/4 was. He'd read about it, Hagrid had described it, Dumbledore's second letter had included a brief and characteristically elegant set of practical instructions. He walked toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 with his trolley and his trunk and his owl and did not break stride. The other side was red. Mainly red. The Hogwarts Express was an enormous scarlet steam engine that produced rather more steam than seemed strictly necessary and had the specific grandeur of something that had been doing the same magnificent thing for centuries and knew it. The platform was busy in a particular way, the organized chaos of families loading trunks and owls and pointing out compartments and hugging children with the fierce quality of parents who were about to spend 4 months not seeing someone they loved. Harry stood at the entrance and looked at all of it for a moment. He felt, for the first time in a long time, genuinely 11. Just that. A kid on a platform, looking at a train, going somewhere new. He took a breath. Right, he said to Claus, who looked at him with magnificent amber contempt. Let's go. He found a compartment 2 carriages from the engine, stowed his trunk, settled Claus's cage on the luggage rack, and sat down. He had a book out. Not one of the set texts, but the political history of the Wisengamot he'd found in a second-hand shop in Diagon Alley, dense and slightly dry but full of useful structural information, and he was reading it when the compartment door opened. The girl who looked in had bushy brown hair and a slightly harried expression and was carrying an enormous book of her own. She scanned the compartment with the focused efficiency of someone doing a search, then looked at Harry with a more concentrated attention, the kind that meant she'd recognized him. "Sorry to bother you," she said, in a voice that was very precise and moved quite quickly, "but have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. I'm helping look." "Not in here," Harry said. She started to leave, then stopped, looking at him with the recognizing expression again. "You're Harry Potter," she said. "Yes. I've read about your case. The Muggle legal proceedings." She said it matter-of-factly, not the way most people said it, not with awe or pity or the slightly uncomfortable reverence that the "Where is Harry" aftermath sometimes generated in people who'd followed it. Just, "I know about this, it's relevant, moving on. I'm Hermione Granger. I'm Muggle-born." "Harry Potter," Harry said, though she obviously knew. "Do you want to sit down?" She looked at the empty compartment, then back at him. "I should find Neville's toad. Do you want to look and then come back?" She considered this. "Yes," she said, with the decisiveness of someone who makes quick assessments and acts on them. "I'll be back." She left. Harry looked at the door for a moment, then back at his book. She had good instincts, he thought. The kind you couldn't fully teach. 20 minutes later she came back, with a round-faced boy who was clearly Neville, still looking traumatized, and behind them a red-haired boy who was tall and slightly too long in the arms for his robes and who was holding a toad with the expression of someone who'd captured it at some personal cost. They arranged themselves in the compartment with the slightly awkward choreography of people who didn't know each other yet. Neville clutched his toad, Trevor, apparently, with the intensity of someone who'd been given responsibility for something and had immediately lost it. The red-haired boy introduced himself as Ron Weasley with the practiced ease of someone from a large family who'd done a great many introductions. Hermione settled into the seat across from Harry with her book open on her lap but not quite looking at it. "So you're actually Harry Potter," Ron said. "I'm actually Harry Potter," Harry agreed. "Fred and George said you'd be, they said you'd probably be, they didn't really say, actually, they just laughed when I asked," Ron admitted. "My brothers," he added. "They're twins. They think everything is funny." "What did you expect?" Harry asked. Ron considered this with the directness Harry immediately liked about him. "I dunno. Something more, dramatic, maybe. I've been hearing about you my whole life. You know who, all of it." "What have you heard?" "That you defeated the most powerful dark wizard in history when you were 1, Ron said. That you've got a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. That you were raised by Muggles." He paused. "And the news stuff. The videos. My mum cried watching them." Harry received this. "The defeating Voldemort part, I didn't do that. Something about the magic my mother used protected me. I was 1. I didn't do anything. But he touched you and something happened. I don't know exactly what." Neither does anyone else, completely. Harry said it plainly, because plain was how he handled things that were strange and large and not fully explainable. What I prefer people to know I've done is the things I actually did. Ron looked at him. The videos, he said. That was you. Properly you. Yes. Ron nodded slowly, in the way of someone reconfiguring. Harry watched it happen and liked him more for not hiding it, for just, visibly, updating. Hermione had looked up from her book. She was watching Harry with an expression that was more complex than Ron's, layered, assessing. The expression of someone whose initial hypothesis is being tested against new data and who is genuinely interested in what the test produces. "What are you reading?" she asked. Harry held up the Wisengamot history. "That's not on any of the set reading lists," she said. "No. Where did you get it?" "Second-hand bookshop in Diagon Alley. Behind Gringotts." Something in Hermione's face shifted into unmistakable interest. "I didn't know there was a second-hand bookshop. Most people don't stop long enough in the alley to find the secondary streets," Harry said. "There's a lot back there." She looked at him the way she'd looked at his book, with the focused attention of someone encountering something more interesting than expected. He thought they were probably going to be friends. He thought it was going to be a productive friendship and possibly occasionally extremely annoying, because she had the same instinct he did for being right and he suspected she was less accustomed to encountering someone who could match her on it. That would be interesting. Ron had a pack of chocolate frogs and a collection of famous witches and wizards cards that he showed to Harry with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a genuine love rather than performing one, and Harry flipped through them with interest, not the collector's interest Ron had, but the historical interest, because the backs of the cards were short biographies and some of them were quite useful, and one of them was Albus Dumbledore's, which described him as the defeater of the Dark Wizard. Grindelwald in 1945, and Harry read that particular card twice and thought about the phrase "for the greater good" that he'd encountered in a footnote somewhere and filed under "investigate further." Neville, as the journey went on, turned out to be quietly interesting in the way of people who were constantly underestimated and had responded to it by developing a very patient interiority. He was nervous in a low-level, habitual way that Harry recognized as the kind that comes not from a single event but from a long accumulation of being told you weren't quite right. He was deeply knowledgeable about herbology in a way that came out sideways. He'd mention a plant offhandedly and then his whole face would change for a moment, bright with something genuine, before he caught himself. "You know a lot about plants," Harry said, during one such moment. Neville looked startled, as if he'd been caught. "My gran thinks I should be better at everything else first," he said. "Why?" "Because," Neville stopped. "My parents were, they were well known. Aurors. Very powerful. And I'm not very powerful. Not yet." He looked at Trevor the Toad. "Gran thinks I should work on it." "I think people are better at things they care about," Harry said. "There's research on it, in Muggle educational psychology. Motivation and domain expertise are more predictive of long-term success than raw baseline ability." He paused. "Also, plants are important. I've read that herbology has direct applications in potions, medical magic, and several areas of defense. It's not a minor subject." Neville looked at him carefully. "You really think so?" "I really think so. Also, I'm not telling you what to care about, just that what you already care about isn't the wrong thing." Neville was quiet for a moment. Something settled in him slightly. Not fixed, not resolved, but a small degree of ease in a place that had been tensed. Ron was watching Harry with the expression he'd had when he was reconfiguring earlier, the same but different now, more settled. Like he'd been trying to work out what to make of Harry and had arrived somewhere. Hermione was not trying to hide the fact that she was listening to all of it and reassessing her initial models with every piece of new data. She wasn't particularly trying to hide it either, which Harry appreciated. The castle appeared through the windows as the train descended toward the lake, and the compartment went quiet. It was, Harry had imagined it, had read descriptions, had studied the architectural references he could find in wizarding architecture books. None of that had made the seeing of it redundant. It rose above the lake on a clifftop, its towers lit from within by something that was warmer than electricity, its reflection broken into gold pieces on the dark water below. The sky behind it was the kind of blue that happened just after sunset before it went fully dark, and the stars were beginning, and the whole thing sat there with the particular solidity of something that had been there for a very long time and intended to continue. "Oh," Neville said softly. "Yeah," Ron said. Hermione said nothing, which Harry thought was its own kind of response. Harry looked at it and felt the thing he'd felt on the train platform, the simple, clean fact of being 11 and going somewhere, and let it be uncomplicated for a moment. Just the castle. Just the lake. Just this. Then he thought, there's a three-headed dog in there, and a trapped stone, and a man with something in his turban, and a headmaster who means well but makes unilateral decisions, and a magical government with significant structural accountability gaps, and approximately 6 years of work ahead of him. He couldn't wait. The boats across the lake were Hagrid's domain, and seeing Hagrid again across the crowd of first years produced a warmth that Harry hadn't fully anticipated. Hagrid spotted him and his face split into the full-beam smile, and he navigated toward Harry through the crowd with the ease of a man who was approximately twice as wide as the space between people but moved through it anyway. "Harry." He stopped himself from the clap on the back at the last second, something he'd learned to do, and instead just looked at him with an expression of complete and uncomplicated happiness. "Yeah, made it. How was the journey?" "Good. I made some friends." Harry glanced back at Ron and Hermione and Neville, who were watching Hagrid with various levels of visible awe. "Hagrid, this is Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Neville Longbottom." Hagrid's face did something when he heard Neville's name, a quick, complicated thing. He looked at Neville for a moment with the kind of recognition that had history behind it. "Longbottom," he said, gently. "I knew your parents. Good people. Very good people." Neville looked back at him. "Thank you," he said, in a voice that was careful with the weight of it. Hagrid nodded. "Then, right, first years, this way. No more and 4 to a boat." The lake crossing was extraordinary. The water was black and deep and the castle grew larger as they approached, more real, more solid, and the small fleet of boats moved across the surface without visible propulsion in the way of things in this world that simply worked, because they'd always worked, because that was how it was here. Harry trailed his fingers in the water for a moment. It was cold. Real cold, the kind that came from depth. Something large moved under the surface, a shadow much bigger than a boat, and was gone. "Giant squid," Ron said, watching where it had been. "Fred and George told me about it. It's friendly, apparently." "There's a giant squid living in the school lake," Hermione said, in the tone of someone updating her mental model of what school meant. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Harry said. The entrance hall had stone floors and suits of armor and torches and brackets and a staircase wide enough for 20 people side by side, and the ceiling was higher than any ceiling Harry had stood under that wasn't a cathedral. The mass of first years stood in it and looked around with the collective expression of people whose frame of reference for large was being revised upward. A professor met them there, Professor McGonagall, who was the Transfiguration teacher and deputy headmistress. She had the kind of face that had strong opinions about proper conduct and communicated them without speaking, and Harry had read enough about her to have significant respect prepared. She was, by all accounts, someone who did things correctly and expected others to do the same. He liked that. She told them about the houses, briefly and with authority. She told them they'd be sorted shortly. She told them to smarten themselves up, which produced a mass self-conscious adjustment from every first year except Harry, who was already neat, and Hermione, who had been making the same adjustments since the train. When McGonagall left briefly to go into the Great Hall, the first years clustered and murmured. Then the ghosts came through the wall. Most of the first years responded to this in the way you'd expect, some with audible sounds, some with rapid backward steps. Harry watched them come through, noting the variety, their apparent ease of movement through solid matter, their slightly theatrical introduction of themselves, the fat friar, nearly headless Nick, others. "You're not frightened," Hermione said quietly beside him. She wasn't either. She was watching with intense analytical interest. "No," Harry said. "I'm curious about the mechanism. How does it work, physically? The going through walls. Moaning Myrtle is in a girl's bathroom, what keeps her there? Is it choice or is it the location of death? There's a whole chapter in Ghosts Across the Ages about this, but it's inconclusive." Hermione turned to look at him directly. "You've read Ghosts Across the Ages? Have you?" "Yes. The inconclusive chapter bothered me too." They looked at each other with the specific mutual recognition of two people who have just confirmed a useful alignment. "You're going to be insufferable," Ron said, from slightly behind them, with the tone of someone who finds this both true and not entirely a complaint. "Probably," Harry agreed. The sorting was done by a hat. Not a person, not a test, not a ceremony involving complex magical apparatus, a hat, old and patched, sitting on a stool, which proceeded to sing a song about the four houses and their qualities in a voice that came from it without any visible mechanism. This produced in Harry a genuine appreciation for the wizarding world's commitment to doing things their own way, which was honestly one of his favorite things about it. He watched the sorting proceed, learning names and faces, noting which students went where with what reaction, mentally associating them with information he'd gathered about the major families from his reading. The sorting was social sorting as much as magical, temperament, value system, the things the hat read as a person's core orientation. A boy named Draco Malfoy had introduced himself on the platform, in a way that contained enough of his father in it for Harry to have recognized the structure immediately, the practiced ease of social confidence built on hierarchy, the assumption that names carried automatic weight, the reading of Harry's situation as something to be navigated for advantage. He'd been polite. He'd also been precisely the kind of polite that was a performance rather than an offer. Malfoy went to Slytherin without any visible hesitation from the hat. "Neville Longbottom," McGonagall called. Neville walked up with Trevor clutched to his chest. The hat had barely touched his head when it called Gryffindor, and Neville's face when he heard it was the face of someone surprised to have been seen correctly. Hermione Granger. She walked up with her back very straight and the expression of someone who had considered all four outcomes and prepared responses for each. The hat took approximately 45 seconds, longer than most, before calling Gryffindor, and Hermione sat down at the Gryffindor table with the expression of someone who would have argued if the answer had been wrong. Harry Potter. The hall did something. A ripple, not quite silence, because there was already near silence, but a particular quality of attention that was different from the attention given to other names. Heads turned. The Gryffindor table looked. The Slytherin table looked. The staff table looked. Harry walked up, because there was nothing to be gained from treating this as anything other than what it was. He sat on the stool. The hat came down over his head and went dark. What happened next was not what he'd expected, which was unusual, because most things were approximately what he'd expected. The hat spoke directly into his mind, a voice that was old and amused and smarter than it looked, which Harry thought was a quality he could respect. Well, it said. "I've been waiting for this one." "Have you?" Harry thought back, because if the hat could enter his mind, presumably the communication could go both ways. A pause. "Oh, this is interesting. You're aware of the process." "I read about it." "What are you looking for, exactly?" "Looking for where you do best. Where your qualities are best matched." A considering pause. "You have courage, yes, plenty of that. You have a fine mind, exceptional really. You have loyalty that runs deep. And you have, now this is interesting, you have a quality that I haven't seen quite like this before. You think in terms of systems. You see structures rather than just people. That's rare. What house does that belong to?" "All of them, in different expressions. In yours, it's the Slytherin quality, the strategic mind, housed in a fundamentally Gryffindor character. Another pause. You could be great in Slytherin, you know. You'd understand it from the inside, which is more than most. I know, Harry thought. But I already understand it from the outside, which is more useful. And Gryffindor has the people I've already decided to be friends with. The hat made a sound in his mind that was unmistakably laughter. You're making a social calculation about your sorting. I'm making a considered decision about where I'll be most effective, Harry thought. Which is different. Is it? Yes. Strategy and selfishness have different directions. The laughter again, and then, Gryffindor. The hat was lifted off his head and the Gryffindor table erupted in a way that suggested the name Harry Potter landing in their house was receiving as good news. Harry stood, straightened his robes, and walked to the table, and sat down next to Hermione, who moved her book to make room without being asked. Gryffindor, Ron said, with a satisfaction that was 3 generations deep. Mum will be pleased. Was there any doubt? Harry asked. Not really. I was a bit worried about being sorted into something mad just to be different. Fred and George said the hat nearly put Fred in Hufflepuff and he's been making up increasingly elaborate stories about it ever since. Harry looked up at the staff table while the remaining students were sorted. He found Quirrell without effort, the lavender turban, the nervous energy, the quality of someone performing a version of themselves that required constant maintenance. Then he found Dumbledore, at the center of the table, who was watching the sorting with an expression of benevolent attention. Dumbledore caught his eye. A nod. Very slight. An acknowledgement. Harry nodded back. Then he looked at the turban. Then he looked back at Dumbledore. Something passed between them, quick, communicative, the non-verbal shorthand of 2 people who'd had enough actual conversations to have a language for things that weren't words. Dumbledore looked briefly at Quirrell. Then back at Harry. The briefest inclination of the head. Yes. I know. I'm watching. Harry turned to Hermione. The turban weighs more on one side than the other, he said quietly. Have you noticed? She looked at the staff table carefully. Yes, she said, after a moment. It's a subtle asymmetry but it's there. If you were hiding something under a turban, Harry said, and you wanted to hide the weight as well as the object, how would you distribute it? Hermione thought. You'd have to use a spell. A featherweight charm on the object itself, or a balancing charm on the turban. But either way the magic would have to be constantly maintained, which means it's active magic, Harry said. Under the turban. All the time. Hermione looked at him. Her face had gone through several rapid stages and landed on something that was equal parts fascinated and alarmed. Harry, what exactly do you know about that man? Quite a lot, Harry said. I'll tell you after dinner. I'm going to want your opinion. Hermione straightened slightly, in the manner of someone who has just been told their opinion is wanted and takes that seriously. The food appeared, because in this world the food simply appeared, great quantities of it, conjured from nothing or brought from somewhere. Harry had read 2 contradictory accounts of the mechanism and hadn't resolved it yet. And Ron made an immediate and dedicated assault on the nearest serving dish while Neville quietly claimed the bread rolls with the strategic efficiency of someone who'd clearly been to family dinners where you had to be fast. Harry ate and talked and listened. He talked to Ron about Quidditch, which Ron loved with the intensity of a religious devotion and explained with impressive clarity and detail. He talked to Hermione about the Wizengamot history and she had opinions about it, strong ones, particularly regarding the representation of Muggle-born wizards in the governance structure, which were exactly the right opinions to have. He talked to Neville about herbology, because he'd meant what he'd said on the train, and watched Neville's face do the thing where it became briefly, brilliantly alive before he caught it. In the staff table, Quirrell ate with the movements of a man who was always slightly uncomfortable in his own body, adjusting, shifting, the turban never quite still. Harry noted it and turned back to his friends. There was a great deal to do. There was the stone to think about, and Quirrell, and the 3rd-floor corridor that was supposedly forbidden, and the accountability gaps in wizarding governance, and Sirius Black's review, and all the reading he hadn't finished yet, and the magic he was going to learn, and the world he was living in, which was stranger and more interesting than anything he'd managed to fully imagine. He thought about the cracked phone on the mattress, the Wi-Fi signal connecting him to the world, the 47,000 viewers who'd watched a small boy in an oversized jumper refuse to accept that this was all there was. He looked up at the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, where stars moved across a sky that was inside a building, and the candles floated, and everything was slightly impossible in the best possible way. He was here. He was properly, actually, irrevocably here. Harry Potter ate his dinner in the Great Hall of Hogwarts and felt, all the way down, exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 6, The Sorting and the Stakes. The first week at Hogwarts had the quality of a language Harry was learning in real time, not just the magic, but the grammar of the place. The way the staircases moved with their own opinions about where you should be going. The way the portraits gossiped and reported and occasionally gave directions that were genuinely useful and occasionally were clearly having a joke at your expense. The way the castle's light changed between floors, warmer at the bottom, sharper and cleaner at the top, as if the building breathed differently at different heights. He mapped it the way he mapped everything. Not with paper, his mental geography was better than any sketch, but by walking, systematically, learning where corridors doubled back and where doors led to other doors and which tapestries concealed actual passages versus which ones just looked like they should. He did this between classes, eating, and sleep, because the map of a place was the first thing you needed if the place was going to be yours. The third-floor corridor was exactly where the rumors put it. He stood at the door one evening 3 days in and looked at the notice that said strictly forbidden to all students and then tried the door handle, because he wanted to know whether it was locked. It was locked. With a specific magical resistance that felt different from a Muggle lock, not just mechanical but intentional, aware, something that pushed back against the handle with a quality that said I know what you are and you're not what I'm looking for. That told him something. He filed it. On his way back down he passed Quirrell coming up the stairs from the dungeons, and they did the thing that people who've been watching each other do when they meet unexpectedly. A brief recalibration, both of them reading the situation. Quirrell's face performed its nervous warmth with the practiced quality Harry had been watching all week, the stammer cycling through pleasantries about Harry enjoying the school, hoping he was settling in. Harry responded pleasantly and watched the left side of the turban, which sat fractionally heavier than the right. "Lovely evening, Professor," Harry said. "Why yes indeed," Quirrell said, and his eyes did something Harry had been waiting to catch, a brief depth charge, something behind the surface that wasn't Quirrell, looking out. Just for a second, and then it was gone, and Quirrell was bowing and moving past him up the stairs. Harry walked down to the common room and found Hermione exactly where he expected to find her, which was in the armchair nearest the fire with a book that was definitely not required reading yet. "He's actually hosting something," Harry said, sitting down across from her. "It's not just loyalty or coercion. There's a presence behind his face. I've seen it twice now." Hermione closed her book with the deliberate care of someone who's been waiting for this conversation. Ron was at the other side of the room playing chess with Seamus Finnegan, but his attention drifted across to them periodically in the way of someone who tracked Harry the way you tracked a weather system, not out of suspicion but out of the understanding that things tended to happen around him. "Possession?" Hermione said. "Something like that. Whether it's full possession or something more symbiotic, I don't know. There are only 3 references to this kind of magic in books I can currently access, and they're all vague." Harry leaned forward. "I need to get into the restricted section. You need a teacher's note for that." "I know. Which teacher are you going to ask?" Harry thought about it. Not Quirrell, obviously. McGonagall would ask too many questions in the wrong direction. Flitwick might do it if I frame it correctly. He paused. Or Dumbledore. Dumbledore would just answer the questions himself, Hermione said. That's actually why he's the better option, Harry said. I don't need the books as much as I need the conversation. The books are the excuse. Hermione looked at him. The fire was doing things to the light in the room, and she had the expression she sometimes got when she was processing something at speed and was mildly annoyed that she hadn't gotten there first. "You're going to ask Dumbledore about Quirrell directly." "Not directly. But in the direction of directly." "Will he tell you anything?" "He'll tell me what he thinks I'm ready for," Harry said. "Which I've learned means I need to show him I'm already there. Then he'll tell me the rest." Ron had drifted over without appearing to mean to, the chess game apparently concluded. He dropped onto the sofa with his arms folded in the posture of someone who'd caught enough of the conversation to want in on the rest. "Are we talking about the turban thing?" "Yes," Harry said. "Right. I've been thinking about that." Ron had a pragmatic, undecorated way of thinking that Harry found genuinely useful. He came at problems from the direction of what they actually meant rather than what they theoretically implied, which was a different angle from Harry's and from Hermione's, and meant they caught things the other two walked past. "If something's living under his turban, in a manner of speaking," Hermione said. "Right, in a manner of speaking, then it needs Quirrell cooperating, doesn't it? For day-to-day stuff. Teaching classes, talking to people. And Quirrell's doing that. So either he doesn't know, he knows," Harry said. "Right, so he agreed to it. Which means he thinks he's getting something out of it. Power," Hermione said immediately. "Or protection. Or both. Which means he's not just a vessel, he's a partner," Harry said. "Which means the threat isn't just Voldemort, it's Quirrell's willingness. And that changes the calculus because willing partners are harder to reach and harder to reason with than people who've been coerced." The fire crackled. Outside the window, the grounds were dark and vast. "I really," Ron said, with the measured emphasis of someone choosing words carefully, "did not think first year was going to be like this. Classes were a different kind of good. Transfiguration was McGonagall's, and she was exactly what Harry had expected, rigorous, precise, with an underlying warmth that she deployed strategically in moments where a student needed it rather than scattering it indiscriminately. She turned her desk into a pig on the first day and then back again, and the class looked at it with the wonder of people encountering something that should be impossible and patently wasn't. Harry's first transfiguration, a matchstick toward a needle, produced a result that was half transformed on the first try, which put him ahead of most of the class. He worked the second attempt with the understanding that the gap between half and full was conceptual rather than technical, that he was thinking about what a needle looked like rather than what it was, and the third attempt produced something that McGonagall picked up, turned over, and placed back on the desk with a precise nod that from her was the equivalent of anyone else's enthusiastic praise. Charms was Flitwick, who was small and enthusiastic and laughed freely and had a teaching style that gave you the structure and then trusted you to build on it, which suited Harry perfectly. The Wingardium Leviosa lesson was the one where Hermione got there first and Ron said the thing about her being a nightmare, and then there was a troll, except not yet, that was Halloween and they were still in September and Harry was getting ahead of himself. Potions was Snape. Harry had read about Snape. He'd read the obvious things, the subject he taught, his tenure, the general outline, but also the less obvious things, the ones that required reading between lines and cross-referencing. He knew Snape had been a Death Eater and had turned informant before Voldemort's fall. He knew Snape had known his mother, from their childhood, from Hogwarts. He knew, because Dumbledore had been relatively candid about it in their third correspondence, that Snape was at Hogwarts at Dumbledore's specific insistence, and that Dumbledore trusted him with a thoroughness that went beyond the professional. None of that told Harry what Snape was like. It only told him what Snape had been, which was something else. What Snape was like, in person, in the first potions lesson, was this: a man who entered a room and owned it without trying, who spoke in a register that never rose or fell because it didn't need to, whose intelligence was visible in his face the way a current was visible in water, not on the surface but as a property of the whole thing. He wore his history in the way people wore it when they decided it was better armor than hiding it. He looked at the class with the specific assessment of someone deciding how useful each person was going to be. Then he looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, with the quality of someone testing how a thing sounded. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked back at him. Professor Snape, he said, with the same evenness, because there was genuinely nothing to be gained by rising to it and genuinely nothing to be embarrassed about either. Snape's eyes did something very quick. He had a good poker face, excellent, actually, but there was one tell, a micro-expression at the eyes, that Harry had been watching for. It appeared now, a brief recalibration, something between surprise and reassessment, there and gone in less than a second. "Let's see if your reputation extends to actual knowledge," Snape said. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry had read magical drafts and potions twice and 1,000 magical herbs and fungi once and had cross-referenced them because that was how he read things. "The draft of living death," he said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel and wormwood both have narcotic properties individually. Combined in correct proportion their effects are multiplicative rather than additive." A fraction of a pause. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar?" "A goat's stomach. It's a stony concretion found in the digestive systems of goats and some other ruminants. It acts as an antidote to most poisons by absorbing them. The quality varies by region of origin. Persian bezoars are historically considered the most potent, though modern research apparently questions whether the distinction is meaningful." Another pause, longer. "What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "Nothing," Harry said. "They're two names for the same plant. Aconite is the third. The active compound is aconitine, which is extremely toxic and has an interesting history in both poisoning cases and early attempts at magical anesthesia." The room was very quiet. Snape looked at him with an expression that was entirely unreadable, which meant the poker face was fully deployed, which was itself informative. Snape said. "It seems fame isn't entirely unearned today." He moved on with the class, and Harry watched his back and thought about Snape's history and Snape's loyalty and Snape's presence in this school and what all of those things together meant for the situation with Quirrell and the stone. He thought Snape was suspicious of Quirrell. He thought the suspicion was correct. He thought Snape wasn't sure what to do with a student who answered 3 cold call questions correctly, which was fair enough. He filed all of it. Malfoy found him on a Thursday, outside after herbology, in the practice-casual way of someone who had planned the encounter and wanted it to look unplanned. He was with his 2 companions, Crabbe and Goyle, who functioned as a kind of ambient physical weight rather than as participants in any intellectual exercise. Malfoy himself had the confidence of someone who'd been told since birth that confidence was his birthright, which gave it a specific quality, real in the sense that he'd never doubted it, but hollow in the sense that he'd never had to build it. "Potter," he said. "How are you finding things?" "Good," Harry said, and kept walking. Malfoy fell into step, which required a slight adjustment because Harry didn't slow down. "I heard you had quite the answer for Snape in potions." "I read ahead." "People are saying you read all the set texts over summer." "People are correct." Malfoy was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. He'd expected, Harry thought, a different kind of reception, either social hunger, the desire to be liked by someone from an important family, or defensiveness, the reaction of someone who felt threatened. Neither was available, and it was causing him to reroute. "My father says you've been quite active in the Muggle world," Malfoy said, and there was something in the word Muggle that he gave a quality to, the way you say a word you've decided means something before you use it. "Before Hogwarts. Your father follows Muggle news?" A fractional flicker. "He keeps informed. Then your father knows that the Muggle legal system is actually quite effective when given sufficient evidence," Harry said pleasantly. "Which is interesting, given some of the things I've read about the immediate aftermath of 1981. Quite a lot of people who should have faced legal proceedings in the Muggle world didn't, because they had access to wizarding evacuation. I imagine that's useful knowledge, if you're the kind of person who values not being prosecuted." Malfoy stopped walking. Harry kept going for 3 steps, then stopped and turned around. He looked at Malfoy with genuine interest and without hostility, because hostility would have been a waste of energy and inaccurate besides. "I'm not your enemy, Malfoy," Harry said. I'm also not your ally in the way you're looking for. What you're doing right now is trying to assess whether you can use me, and the answer is, not in the ways you're thinking about. But I'm also not going to spend energy resenting you for trying. It's a reasonably logical approach given what you know about how power works. He paused. It's just that you've been taught a version of how power works that's a bit outdated. Malfoy's face had gone through several things. It had arrived at something that wasn't quite anger would have been simple, but was more complicated than that. Something that was listening, unwillingly. What version? He said, in spite of himself. The version where names and lineage are the primary currency, Harry said. They matter. I'm not saying they don't. But documentation matters more. Evidence matters more. And the right relationships with institutions that can actually do things matter more. Your father knows that, I think, at some level. That's why he follows Muggle news. Crabbe and Goyle were looking between Harry and Malfoy with the baffled expression of people trying to follow a conversation that had moved past its expected endpoint. Malfoy looked at Harry for a long moment. His face was doing something private that Harry didn't push for access to. You're very strange, Malfoy said finally. Probably, Harry said. But correct. He turned and walked back toward the castle. The letter from Jennifer Cole arrived on a Tuesday in October, forwarded through Dumbledore's office the way Muggle correspondence was handled for Hogwarts students, some system involving a ministry liaison that Harry hadn't fully mapped yet but intended to. He read it in the dormitory with Ron and Neville engaged in some activity involving Neville's herbology homework and a potted plant that Ron kept claiming was doing something suspicious. Hermione was in the armchair by his bed with transfiguration notes, an arrangement she'd arrived at without discussion approximately 2 weeks in and that Harry had understood was now a default. He read the letter twice. Sirius Black's case had reached the review board for formal hearing. The date was set for December. The evidence, the newspaper inconsistencies Harry had identified, the absence of trial records, the testimonial inconsistencies, and crucially a new piece of evidence that Foss had located, a secondary witness account from 1981 that had been filed and never actioned, was being presented in full. The review board had, Jennifer wrote, the legal authority to recommend immediate release pending further investigation, or to escalate to full exoneration proceedings. We are cautiously optimistic, Jennifer had written, which in Jennifer's language meant she thought they were going to win. Harry set the letter down. Ron, who could read a room, had gone quiet. Even Neville's plant had settled. Good news or complicated news? Ron asked. Good news, Harry said. The man who should have been my guardian, Sirius Black, is going to get a proper hearing. The evidence is solid. Ron was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone calculating what to say and deciding on honest over safe. What happens if it goes the right way? If he gets out? I don't know yet, Harry said. We've been corresponding. Letters, through official channels. But, I don't know what it looks like in person. He paused. He's been in Azkaban for 10 years. That's a long time, Neville said quietly, from the corner. Yes. My parents have been in St. Mungo's for 10 years, Neville said, and his voice had the careful quality of something handled many times without getting easier. It changes people. The long ones always do. The room was quiet with the particular quiet of shared weight distributed evenly. I know, Harry said. But he's, in his letters, he's still there. The person. It's still him. He looked at the letter. I think being seen coming might have helped. Knowing someone was working on it. Neville nodded slowly. Harry thought about what that meant for Neville, whether anyone was working on his parents' situation, whether anyone was mapping that particular injustice with the same systematic care, and thought, add it to the list. Not today. But add it. He wrote back to Jennifer that night. He wrote to Foss separately, with 3 questions about the procedural aspects of the review board that he wanted to understand before the hearing. He wrote to Webb asking whether the estate implications, guardianship, trust, the formal legal relationship, had been factored into the hearing preparation. Then he wrote to Sirius. This letter took longer than the others. He sat with the parchment and the quill. He'd adapted to quills faster than expected, because the mechanical difference was less important than having something to say, and thought about what he wanted to communicate. He wrote, Sirius. The hearing is in December. Jennifer Cole is confident. I've reviewed the evidence myself and she's right to be. You're going to get out. I don't know what comes after that, for either of us, but I wanted you to know that the after exists, and that I'm in it, and that I'd like to meet you properly when you're ready. Harry. He sealed it and put it with the outgoing post. Then he went to find Dumbledore. The headmaster's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that required a password, Sherbet Lemon, which Harry had extracted from a fifth-year prefect with a single well-phrased question, and which opened onto a circular room full of silver instruments doing various things for reasons Harry intended to investigate later, and portraits of previous headmasters who were variably awake and variably interested. Dumbledore was at his desk. Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch, and Harry spent a moment looking at Fawkes because you had to. The bird was genuinely extraordinary, the kind of red and gold that you couldn't look at without your eyes insisting it was important. Harry, Dumbledore said, and gestured to the chair across his desk with the ease of someone who'd been expecting this. I understand a letter arrived. Word travels fast. It has help, Dumbledore said, with the slight smile that he wore when he was being self-aware about his own methods. Good news, I hope. Good news. Harry sat down. I want to talk about something else, though. I thought you might. Quirrell, Harry said. The slight smile didn't disappear, but it changed quality. Yes, Dumbledore said. You know. I have known since September, Dumbledore said. When he returned from his sabbatical. How much of what's under the turban is left of Voldemort? Dumbledore looked at him across the desk with the look Harry had come to understand as the one he used when deciding how much to give. Harry held it steadily and waited, because this was the part where showing you were already there was what unlocked the next piece. Very little, Dumbledore said finally. A fragment. A shade. He has been surviving by inhabiting others, by consuming unicorn blood. I suspect that's the reason for certain disturbances in the forest. He is genuinely diminished. Dangerous still, but not at full capacity. The stone is what he needs to come back properly, Harry said. Yes. And the protections you've set in place are considerable, Dumbledore said. But not impenetrable, to someone sufficiently motivated and sufficiently clever. What happens if he gets to it? Harry asked, not because he didn't know the general answer but because he wanted Dumbledore's specific assessment. He returns, Dumbledore said simply. With a body. With power. With a decade's worth of accumulated purpose and a significantly diminished capacity for patience. How much time do we have? To the end of the school year, I believe. He cannot accelerate beyond a certain rate. The fragment he is depends on Quirrell's cooperation, and Quirrell's body is deteriorating under the burden. Harry sat with that. So he's going to make a move this year. I believe so. And your plan is to let it get to the stone's actual location and stop it there. Dumbledore looked at him. There was something in his expression, not quite guilt, but adjacent to it, the look of someone caught mid-strategy by someone who can see the strategy. The protections are designed to stop most people, Harry said. Yes. I know. But Quirrell is a competent wizard with a very motivated passenger. And the actual configuration of the protection rooms, there are at least 2 of them that rely on problem-solving skills that a first-year student with sufficient preparation could navigate. How do you know about the rooms? Dumbledore asked. I asked the right questions of the right portraits, Harry said. And cross-referenced some things I noticed about the warding on the 3rd floor. He paused. I'm not saying your plan is wrong. I'm saying I want to be part of it, properly, with actual information. rather than part of it accidentally and underprepared. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, careful moment. "You are 11 years old," he said, and unlike when Hagrid said it, when Dumbledore said it there was no trace of dismissal, just the specific gravity of a man who was weighing a responsibility. "I know," Harry said. "I was also 7 when I documented my own abuse for 47,000 viewers and survived it. The age is a fact. It's not a ceiling." The portraits on the walls had gone, with the careful nonchalance of people trying to look as if they weren't listening, very still. Fawkes made a soft sound from his perch. Dumbledore sat back in his chair, and Harry watched something happen in him, something settle, something that had been held taut and was choosing to release. He looked older for a moment, and then younger, and then just himself. "All right, Harry," he said. "Ask me what you actually want to know." Harry pulled out a piece of parchment he'd prepared. It had 13 questions on it. Dumbledore looked at it, and the slight smile came back, and this time it was entirely genuine. "Of course you have a list," he said. "I always have a list," Harry said. They worked through it. Some answers were full, some were partial, and there were 2 where Dumbledore said I won't tell you that yet, not because I think you can't handle it but because the knowing at this stage would cause more difficulty than it resolves, and Harry received those answers and noted them and moved on, because he'd gotten 13 questions and 12.5 answers, which was a better yield than most people got from Albus Dumbledore in a single conversation. As Harry stood to leave, Dumbledore said, "Harry." Harry turned. "I want you to know," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that had nothing strategic in it, that was just a person talking to another person across the distance of what they'd both been through, that if I could undo the decisions I made in 1981, the placement, the lack of consultation, all of it, I would. Not because it would be useful to undo them, but because it would have been the right thing to do for you, specifically, as a person. He paused. "You had Lily's mind and James's heart and you deserved better than a cupboard and indifference." Harry looked at him. Turned it over. "I know," he said finally. "And I appreciate that." A pause. "You should also know that I've decided I'll forgive you." "Not yet, but I will. I wanted to tell you so you didn't think the door was closed." Something moved through Dumbledore's face that was, for a moment, entirely unguarded. "Thank you," he said quietly. Harry nodded once, pocketed his list, and went back down the spiral staircase into the castle. The gargoyle closed behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment with the weight of the conversation settling, all its pieces finding their places, Quirrell and the stone and December and Sirius and the hearing and 13 questions and the thing he'd told Dumbledore at the end, which he hadn't planned to say but which had been true the moment he'd said it. Forgiveness was not the same as forgetting. It was not even the same as trust, completely. It was a decision about what to carry forward and what to put down. He was getting good at distinguishing the two. He walked back toward Gryffindor Tower, through corridors that moved around him in their opinionated way, past portraits that watched him go, in a castle that was becoming, piece by piece and day by day, something he knew from the inside. On Halloween, the troll was exactly where he'd read it might be, and Harry was in the girls' bathroom not because he'd wandered there lost but because he'd been watching the corridor all evening after noticing Quirrell's behavior at the feast, and he got there 40 seconds before Ron and pulled Hermione under the sinks before the Trolls Club came down. The troll ended up unconscious on the floor in a way that involved Harry's wand and a very specific application of the Wingardium Leviosa they'd learned in Charms and a piece of reasoning about the troll's skull density that Hermione later described as both impressive and deeply alarming. McGonagall came in and looked at the troll and looked at the 3 of them and said, with the voice of someone who had not expected this and was integrating it, "Explain." They explained. McGonagall gave Ron and Harry 5 points each, gave Hermione 10 for presence of mind, then took 5 from each of them for being there, which Harry thought was fair on balance. Walking back to Gryffindor Tower, Hermione slightly pale and holding it together by sheer willpower, Ron with the slightly shaky energy of post-adrenaline, Harry thought about the year unfolding ahead, December and Sirius, Christmas and the return to Grace's house, spring and whatever Quirrell was planning, all of it running in parallel, all of it connected. Right, Ron said, into the silence. We're friends now, then. That's how that works, isn't it? Troll incident, automatic friends. That's how it works, Harry agreed. Hermione made a sound that was trying to be dignified and was instead just relieved. The castle moved around them, warm and enormous and entirely itself, and Harry walked through it with his friends on either side and thought, yes. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Chapter 7, What Lies Below. December arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, suddenly, as if the castle had been waiting for permission and then acted on it all at once. Snow on the grounds, frost on the interior windows in the mornings despite the fires, the great hall decorated with 12 enormous Christmas trees that appeared overnight between November and December without anyone seeing it happen, which Harry had tried to catch and failed, and which Hermione suspected was a combination of house elf labor and a very good concealment charm. The house elves were a separate problem that Hermione had discovered and was now processing with the focused outrage of someone whose model of the world had just acquired a significant moral complication. Harry had read about them already and had the same fundamental problem with the arrangement. The ethics of it were genuinely troubling, but understood that it was a structural issue requiring structural change rather than individual intervention, and had said so, which Hermione had received in the way she sometimes received things he said that were correct but less satisfying than feeling individually furious. It's not that the anger isn't appropriate, Harry told her, on the moving staircase one morning, dodging a step that had decided to retract. It's that if you want it to actually change, you need to understand how it got there and what would have to move for it to be different. The Ministry of Magic passed the Being Classification Act in 1811, which is where the governance structure comes from. That's the thing to push. And how exactly does an 11-year-old push the Ministry of Magic? Hermione asked, catching the handrail as the staircase pivoted. Carefully, Harry said. And with good documentation. I've been corresponding with a junior official there for 2 years. Hermione looked at him. This happened periodically. She'd be moving at her usual speed through an assumption about what was possible and then encounter something Harry had already done and have to stop for a moment. You have a contact at the Ministry of Magic. His name is Perkins. He's been there for 30 years and he knows where every body is buried, administratively speaking. Harry stepped off onto the next floor. He's been very useful on the Wisengamot governance questions. Hermione stepped off behind him. Sometimes, she said, I wonder what you'd be like if you'd had a normal childhood. Probably much less organized, Harry said, and turned toward the Transfiguration corridor. The Sirius Black hearing was on the 15th of December, and Harry was not there. This had been Jennifer's call, and Webb's, and Foss's, all in agreement. Harry's presence would introduce a media dimension into the proceedings that could complicate the legal argument, and the legal argument was solid enough to stand without him. He'd provided his written account, his analysis of the newspaper inconsistencies, his correspondence with Dumbledore about Pettigrew, all of it submitted formally through Foss into the record. The case, Jennifer had said in her last letter, was as good as it was going to get, and it was very good. Harry sat in charms on the 15th and did the summoning charm they were practicing, still 2 years above year level, which Flitwick had clocked immediately and accommodated with the graceful practicality of a good teacher, and tried not to think about a room in the Ministry of Magic where people were deciding something that mattered. Hermione, without being asked, sat next to him in every class that day, which was not their usual arrangement. Ron stayed close in the way he did when something was happening, the way you kept someone in peripheral vision not to watch them but to be available. Neville brought him a mince pie from somewhere. It was December and the castle had started producing them from unknown locations, and set it on the desk next to Harry's wand without explanation. Harry ate it. Neville didn't make anything of it. This was, Harry thought, Neville's particular gift. He understood that sometimes what a person needed wasn't attention to the thing, just the fact of company that didn't require performance. The reply came by owl at dinner. Claws descended from the Ollery and landed directly on Harry's plate, knocking a roast potato onto the tablecloth with the complete indifference of a bird who felt tabletops were technically her jurisdiction. She was carrying a letter in Jennifer's handwriting, sealed with the blue wax she used for significant correspondence. Harry broke the seal. He read it. He read it again. Well? Ron said. Harry set the letter on the table. He looked at it for a moment, at the words full exoneration pending Pettigrew investigation, immediate release recommended, review board unanimous. He's getting out, Harry said. The Gryffindor table around them was its usual dinner noise, laughter and conversation and the clatter of cutlery, and it carried on in its usual way, entirely unaware, while Harry Potter sat in the middle of it with the letter from Jennifer Cole in his hand and felt something shift in the architecture of his life. Not dramatically. Not like an earthquake. Like a door that had been slightly off its hinges finally sitting correctly in its frame. Ron punched his arm, which was his preferred method of expressing things that felt too large for words. Hermione said, "Oh, Harry," in a voice that had exactly the right amount of warmth in it. Neville said nothing, which was exactly right. Harry looked at Claus, who was stealing a piece of his chicken with serene entitlement. "Good girl," he told her. She looked at him as if this was obvious and the chicken was her fee. He wrote to Sirius that night. Not a careful letter, not a structured one, just what was true. Sirius. You're free. I hope by the time this reaches you, you already know. I wanted to write it down anyway because some things should be written down. Harry. He sent it with Claus and then lay on his back in the dormitory with the curtains of his four-poster pulled half back so he could see the window. The grounds were white and still under the snow, the lake a dark shape in the middle of it, the forest at the edge of everything. He thought about 1981. About two people who'd written their wishes into a legal document and had those wishes overridden. About the 11 years that had happened as a result. About a man sitting in a prison for a crime he didn't commit while the person who committed it lived small and hidden somewhere in the country. He thought about Pettigrew. Still out there. Foss had filed a separate motion about Pettigrew, pursuit, investigation, the legal mechanism for treating a man believed dead as potentially alive. It was a slower process, less clear-cut than Sirius's case, but it was in motion. Everything was in motion. That was the thing about setting something going, it didn't stop just because your attention moved elsewhere. It kept going. He turned his mind to the other thing moving. He'd been watching Quirrell for 3 months. Not obviously, Harry didn't do obvious surveillance, because obvious surveillance changed what people did and contaminated the data. He did it the way he did everything, integrated into the normal texture of his life, a matter of being observant rather than watchful. He sat near Quirrell at the rare meals when Quirrell actually ate, which were becoming less frequent. He paid attention in defense against the dark arts, a subject which Quirrell taught with the specific inadequacy of a man who was either not allowed to teach it properly or was conserving energy for something else. He noted when Quirrell disappeared from the staff table in the evenings, which direction, how long. Quirrell was escalating. Harry had noticed it in November 1st, a tightening in the quality of the performance. The stammer more effortful, the nervous warmth more brittle, the eyes doing the depth charge thing more frequently and less controlled. Something in the Quirrell-Voldemort dynamic was shifting, and Harry's best analysis was that the shift was pressure from below, Voldemort, running out of patience, pushing harder against whatever cooperation Quirrell had initially offered and turning it towards something closer to possession. Which meant the timeline was shortening. He'd told Dumbledore this, in their second proper conversation in November, and Dumbledore had listened with the attention of someone who was receiving information that confirmed their own assessment. He'd asked Harry what he thought the trigger event would be. Harry had said, when Quirrell decides the risk of attempting it is lower than the risk of continued dependency. Dumbledore had looked at him for a long moment and said, yes, exactly. They'd developed, over these months, something that was not quite a partnership but was in that direction. Dumbledore consulted him in the specific way of someone who discovered a useful mind and was learning what to do with the discovery. Harry offered what he saw and held back what he needed to verify, because speculation offered as fact was bad information hygiene. There was mutual respect in it, and mutual wariness, and something underneath both of those that was tentative and real. Christmas holiday came and Harry went back to Guildford. Grace's house was exactly the same and somehow felt larger than he remembered, which he thought was probably a function of spending 3 months in a castle and recalibrating his sense of scale. Marcus was there for Christmas Day. He came with his new family, who were solid warm people who laughed easily and fed everyone too much, and Harry and Marcus sat in Grace's garden in coats and hats despite the cold because they needed the air and the privacy. "How is it?" Marcus asked. "The school." "Good," Harry said. "Genuinely. The magic is, it's real, Marcus. It's a real thing and it's extraordinary, and I think I'm going to spend the next 6 years not quite getting used to it in the best possible way." "And the people?" "Ron's my best friend. He's easy to be around in a way that doesn't cost you anything. Hermione's going to run something important when she's older. She has that thing where she doesn't stop until the problem is solved." Neville's, Harry thought about it. Neville is quietly becoming someone remarkable, and he doesn't know it yet, and I think one of the useful things I can do this year is let him see it. Marcus nodded. "And the bad stuff?" "Being managed." Harry looked at the garden, the dormant apple tree, the birds picking at the cold ground. "There's a situation with a dark wizard, a remnant of one, really, and a stolen artifact and a professor who's been compromised. I've got the shape of it. I'm working out the timing." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know that's not a normal thing to say." "I know. Most 11-year-olds are worried about whether they'll get into the right football team." "I was never going to be most 11-year-olds, Harry said. "No," Marcus agreed. "But you should also," he stopped, finding the right words. "You should also eat your Christmas dinner and play a stupid card game with Grace's nephews and let it be Christmas. You know. Not every minute has to be part of the plan." Harry looked at him. Marcus looked back with the even, shrewd steadiness of someone who had watched Harry for 2 years and cared about what he saw. "You're right," Harry said. "I know." They went inside and ate an enormous amount of food and played the stupid card game, which Harry won twice by treating it as a logic puzzle, and lost once deliberately so Grace's youngest nephew wouldn't have his Christmas ruined, which Priya, via Skype on Grace's laptop, her new foster placement 3 towns over, observed and raised an eyebrow about in the way that meant "I saw that and I'm not going to say anything but I saw it." It was the best 4 days in a long time. January came back cold and purposeful, and Harry walked back through the entrance hall on the first evening of term and immediately knew something had changed. He couldn't have said precisely what. The castle had a quality, he'd noticed this over the previous term, a kind of ambient sensitivity in the building itself, as if the accumulated magic of centuries had given it something like a nervous system. When things were normal, it felt a certain way. Right now it felt like a held breath. He went to find Dumbledore. The gargoyle said "Sherbet lemon" and stepped aside, and Harry went up the spiral staircase and knocked. "Come in, Harry." Dumbledore was at the window, which he wasn't usually, and Fawkes was unusually still on his perch, and the silver instruments on the tables were moving faster than Harry had seen them move before, their tiny complicated motions accelerated, urgent. "Something happened over Christmas," Harry said. "Quirrell attempted to reach the stone," Dumbledore said, turning from the window. "On the 28th of December. He got through the first 2 protection chambers before the 3rd stopped him." Harry processed this. "Which 3rd?" "Professor Sprout's Devil's Snare was the 2nd. Professor Flitwick's Key Room was the 3rd. He got through Sprout's and not Flitwick's." Harry ran through what he knew of the configuration. "The Key Room is flying, isn't it?" "Brooms. He'd need to fly. And flying is not Quirrell's strength," Dumbledore said. He retreated. "But now he knows which chambers he can get through." "Yes. So the Key Room is the bottleneck." "For now," Dumbledore said, and his voice had something in it, not quite worry, but the specific gravity of a man who was running calculations about time and options. "I've reinforced the charm on the Key Room. But Quirrell is not going to stop. He is," a pause. "More compromised than he was in September. The distinction between Quirrell and what's inside him is becoming difficult to maintain. How long? The spring, Dumbledore said. Before the end of the school year. I'm certain of it now. Harry stood in the office and thought about the timeline, about what he knew and what Dumbledore knew and what Voldemort knew, which was that the stone was here and the body Voldemort needed to survive long-term was barely holding, and that urgency was a pressure that did things to strategies. What's at the end? Harry asked. After all the chambers. What actually holds the stone? A mirror, Dumbledore said. The mirror of Erist. The stone can only be retrieved by someone who wants to find it but not use it. Harry turned that over. So someone who found it purely for someone else's benefit. Or someone whose deepest desire is genuinely protective rather than acquisitive. Dumbledore looked at him. It was, I believe, rather good work. It's elegant, Harry agreed. But Voldemort will have thought about it. He can't go through himself, he doesn't have a self, properly. He needs Quirrell's desire. And Quirrell's desire, is for power, Dumbledore said. Which would prevent him from taking the stone from the mirror regardless of what he could see in it. So they're stuck. Unless they find another mechanism. Or another person, Dumbledore said, and his eyes came to Harry with the specific weight that Harry had learned to read as significance being carefully measured. Harry met his gaze. You think he'll try to use a student? I think it's possible. Someone young, whose desire might be read as pure, whose motives he might believe he can manipulate. A pause. I think you should know this, because I believe you are the most likely candidate he would attempt to approach. Harry sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk without being invited, because this was a conversation you had sitting down. He knows I'm here, Harry said. I believe Voldemort has been aware of your presence since September, Dumbledore said. The connection between your wands, the twin cores, creates a resonance that an entity as sensitive as he currently is would register. What does he want from me? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. That is the question I have spent considerable time with. He might want you as a tool, to retrieve the stone on his behalf. He might want you as an obstacle removed. Or, another pause, longer. He might want you as something else. As a prospect. A mind he'd rather recruit than fight. Harry thought about this. About what Voldemort was, at bottom, what remained of him. A fragment that refused to stop, that had tried to continue past every attempt to end it, that was clever enough and desperate enough to be somewhere between dangerous and pitiable. An intelligence that had once been a person and had made choices that led here, to a turban, to a host, to a school full of children and a plan to steal immortality. He's going to try to talk to me, Harry said. I believe that's likely, yes. Before he goes for the stone. Possibly. Possibly as part of the attempt. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. Harry, I want to tell you something clearly. If that confrontation happens, whatever form it takes, I want you to understand that you are not alone in it. I will be, you're going to leave, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. You're planning to be away, Harry said. Not as an accusation, just a fact he'd worked out from the pattern of things. When he makes his move. You're going to create the conditions for it to happen with you absent, because you believe the stone's protection, specifically the mirror, requires the right person to get to it first. And you believe I'm that person. The office was very quiet. Fawkes shifted on his perch with a soft sound. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. You are, he said finally, profoundly dangerous to the assumptions of everyone around you. Is that a yes? It is, Dumbledore said. I have been hoping you would be the right person in the right place, yes. And I have been uncomfortable with that hope, because I am aware that it is in tension with my responsibility to your safety. It's all right, Harry said. I'd rather know the plan than stumble into it. He leaned back in the chair. But I want to negotiate the terms. Dumbledore blinked. The terms. Of my role. I'll go through the chambers if it comes to that. I'll face whatever's waiting at the end. But I want your commitment that you'll be accessible, that if I need extraction it's possible, that Fawkes can reach me, that there's a communication channel. He paused. And I want complete honesty from you, about whatever it is you learn from this. Whatever the encounter with Voldemort reveals about the connection between us, about my scar, about the twin core thing. All of it. Dumbledore sat with this. His face was doing something complicated, the weight of it, the recognition that the 11-year-old across his desk was negotiating the terms of his own role in a plan that an old man had been quietly building around him. You have thought about this for some time, Dumbledore said. Since September, Harry said. When I first noticed Quirrell's turban. Fawkes made a sound that was, Harry was almost certain, laughter. Dumbledore looked at his phoenix. Then at Harry. Something in his expression settled into a kind of peace, the peace of someone who has been trying to carry a weight alone and has just had it lifted and shared. You have my word, Dumbledore said. All of it. February and March had the quality of a fuse. Classes continued. Harry got 12 inches on the properties of Jobberknoll feathers for Snape, who gave it an 8 out of 10 and wrote a comment in the margin that said adequate in a way that meant something better than adequate, which Harry had decoded by watching Snape's comments on other students' work for scale. He did the Transfiguration midterm and McGonagall wrote exceptional on his, which she also wrote on Hermione's, and the two of them spent 3 days being slightly competitive about it in a way that Ron found privately hilarious. Hermione had, by March, fully arrived at the point Harry had predicted on the train, a mind that had been operating at full power without adequate opposition for 10 years and was now running at full power with adequate opposition, which was producing something genuinely remarkable. She was reading 2 textbooks ahead in every subject, but more than that, she was starting to ask the questions that went past the books, the why questions, the ones about mechanism and implication rather than just fact. She was starting to become a thinker rather than a learner, and Harry watched it happen with something that was very close to pride. Ron was doing something different. Ron was developing, in his quiet and apparently effortless way, the kind of strategic intelligence that presented itself as instinct but was actually pattern recognition built from a lifetime of watching complex dynamics in a large family. He played chess the way Harry thought about problems, seeing 15 moves forward, yes, but more importantly seeing the other person's logic and accounting for it. He was also, consistently, the person who noticed when Harry had been in his own head too long and said something deliberately stupid to break the loop, which was a more sophisticated social intervention than it looked. Neville was growing. Slowly, unevenly, with setbacks that he took seriously and quietly rather than catastrophically. Harry kept doing the thing he'd decided to do, treating Neville's knowledge as valuable, directing questions to him in study sessions, making sure the group's dynamic had room for him in it. In herbology Neville was flat out the best in the year. In everything else he was getting better, because being treated as capable by people you respected was, empirically, one of the most effective educational interventions possible. Harry had read that, but he'd also lived it, in Mr. Farrow's classroom on Tuesday and Thursday lunchtimes in Guildford, and he knew it was true. In the first week of April, Quirrell stopped coming to meals entirely. Harry noticed on the second day. By the fourth he mentioned it to Dumbledore via the note system they'd established, a specific owl to a specific address, coded simply, that produced a response through the same channel within hours. I've noticed, Dumbledore wrote back. I'm monitoring. Be ready. Harry wrote to Grace, a normal letter about the end of term and the school's Quidditch team, which encoded in its 6th paragraph a message that Grace would know to pass to Jennifer and Ms. Anand. Things are going to happen before the end of the school year. I'm prepared. I'll write when it's done. Grace's response came back in 4 days, we know. We're here. Stay safe and don't be reckless. Also Claus has been eating Marcus's homework, please address this. Harry smiled at the letter and went to Quidditch practice. He'd made the Gryffindor team, which was, fine. Good. Flying was extraordinary, a physical freedom with no equivalent in the Muggle world, and Harry on a broom had turned out to be something that looked like instinct but was actually, like most of what he did, preparation applied at speed. He'd read about seeker positions, about the patterns that snitches flew, about the variables in play during a match, and then when he got in the air it had been a matter of applying the preparation to real conditions. Wood, the captain, had looked at him after the first practice with the dazed expression of someone who'd gotten more than they'd bargained for and wasn't sure whether to be relieved or unnerved. He'd been relieved, mostly. The Quidditch match against Hufflepuff was the last normal Saturday Harry had before everything accelerated. After the match, which Gryffindor won, and which Harry caught the snitch in 12 minutes while also managing to identify 2 tactical patterns in the Hufflepuff beater's coordination that he might use later, he landed near the goalposts and Ron ran over with the full-body enthusiasm of someone whose team had just won and was experiencing this as a personal victory. 12 minutes. Ron was saying. 12 minutes, do you know what the record is? I know what the record is, Harry said, passing the snitch to Wood for logging. 14, the record is 14, and you just, Ron. Yeah. Is Quirrell at the match? Ron's celebratory energy shifted. He scanned the stands carefully, with the pattern recognition that was his best quality deployed without pause. No, he said. He's not. Harry turned toward the castle. Harry, Ron said. Not yet, Harry said. It's not tonight. But soon. He turned back and looked at Ron, who was standing with his Gryffindor scarf slightly sideways and the celebratory energy rerouted into the steady alertness that Harry had come to rely on. When it happens, I need you to trust me that I know what I'm doing. I do trust you, Ron said, without hesitation, in the uncomplicated way of someone for whom this was just a fact. Harry looked at him. Good. Let's go eat. The night it happened was a Tuesday in May, which wasn't the night Harry had predicted. He'd thought a weekend, fewer people about, more cover for Quirrell moving through corridors. But Voldemort had stopped caring about Quirrell's careful timing, which was exactly the kind of escalation that happened when the host and the passenger were no longer in agreement. Harry knew it was happening because Fawkes landed on his windowsill at 2 in the morning. He was already awake. He'd been awake for an hour, lying in the dark with the specific alertness that came when everything he'd been preparing for was about to arrive. He looked at Fawkes, who looked back with eyes that were golden and old and new things. Right, Harry said. He got up. He dressed. He took his wand. He walked quietly through the dormitory past the sleeping shapes of Ron and Neville and Seamus and Dean, went down the stairs, through the portrait hole, and stood in the dark corridor outside Gryffindor Tower. There was a moment, brief, just a moment, where he was 11 years old in a corridor in the middle of the night with a wand and the knowledge of what was at the end of the descent below. He took a breath. Then he went. Chapter 8. The Mirror and the Man. The third-floor corridor was empty and cold in the specific way of places that had been holding something back for a long time. Harry moved through it without a light. He'd mapped this walk mentally enough times that he didn't need one, and light was information given to an opponent, and the castle was quiet around him in the way it got in the deep middle of the night, a quality of held breath that was different from the held breath he'd noticed in January. This was the actual thing, not the anticipation of it. You could feel the difference. The door to the forbidden corridor was already open. Not forced. Opened properly, by someone with either the authority or the magic to do it. Harry noted the absence of damage around the frame, the way the door sat fully open rather than ajar, and thought, Quirrell came through here with confidence, which meant Voldemort's intelligence about the access had been good. He went through. Fluffy was asleep. The music was playing, a small enchanted harp, still running, already there, which meant Quirrell had set it and moved on rather than staying to hold it. Smart. Or impatient. Harry thought both, and thought about what that combination told him about the pace of the thing moving through the chambers below. He found the trapdoor, went through it without hesitating, and fell into Devil's Snare. He'd read about Devil's Snare in Professor Sprout's recommended supplementary text, which he'd read because he read everything and which had included a very clear description of the mechanism, light and warmth as the countermeasure, the plant's instinctive response to brightness. He cast Lumos as he fell, the light expanding around him, and the tendrils released with the disappointed speed of something that had expected a struggle and hadn't gotten one. He dropped to the floor below and stood. Moved on. The key room was chaos in a particular way. Hundreds of winged keys hung in the air, most of them still, but one, the right one, the one that had been caught and used and then released back into the flock, was moving wrong. Slightly bent wing, flying in an erratic spiral near the far rafters, trying to blend back in but damaged from handling. Harry scanned the brooms. Took the nearest. Pushed off from the floor. He caught the key in 40 seconds, which he suspected was close to the fastest it was possible to do, because he wasn't racing, he was reading the pattern of the flock and working out where the damaged key would be when he needed it to be rather than chasing where it was. He descended, unlocked the door, put the key back in the air, returned the broom. Went on. The chess room was the one that made him stop. Not because of the chess pieces, which were large and threatening and arranged in the specific configuration of a game already in progress. Not because of the quality of the enchantment, which was impressive. But because of what the room told him about its designer. McGonagall had made this. He'd known that from his research, and standing in it confirmed it, the scale of thinking required to set a chess problem at this level, to account for the variables of who might come through and what they might be capable of, spoke to a mind that worked the way Harry's did, in systems and structures and long chains of implication. The problem was already partially solved. The white pieces had been moved, several of them were missing, sacrificed, and the remaining configuration showed the game's state clearly. Quirrell had played it through, probably quickly, probably with the kind of competent chess knowledge that a Hogwarts professor would have. Harry studied the board for 90 seconds. Then he moved 3 pieces, not as plays but as repositioning, resetting the problem from its current state to a configuration that could be resolved in 4 moves rather than the 12 the current board required. He played it through. The pieces moved with the autonomy of things that knew their job, and the path opened. He went through. The troll in the next chamber was unconscious already, which told him Quirrell had come through recently. The troll's slump was fresh, whatever spell had been used still visible in the residual shimmer around it. Harry stepped around it without breaking stride. The potions room had a fire barrier and 7 bottles on a table and a rolled note from Snape explaining the logic puzzle. Harry picked up the note, read it once, resolved it in approximately 40 seconds because the logic was sound but the puzzle was constructed for someone without a strong chemistry background and Harry had done 2 years of Muggle chemistry with Mr. Farrow and the riddle mapped directly onto a standard process of elimination with 2 variables fixed. He drank the smallest bottle. Fire went dark. Ice became passable. He went through. The chamber at the end was the largest, the most different in atmosphere from everything before it. The others had been task rooms, practical, functional, the magic of protection made mechanical. This room was something else. Older feeling, though Harry suspected that was intentional, the emotional weight built into the space, the slight amplification of whatever you brought into it. The mirror of Eriste stood against the far wall. Even from 20 feet away, before he was looking into it, Harry could feel it the way you could feel a very loud sound that wasn't quite in the range of hearing. A pressure, a pull. Quirrell was standing in front of it. He wasn't looking at the mirror. He was staring at it, which was different, his body tight with frustration, his hands out at his sides with the specific quality of someone wanting to grab something that wasn't giving itself to be grabbed. The mirror's surface was reflecting back whatever Quirrell saw in it, and whatever that was, it wasn't what he needed, because the stone hadn't appeared and Quirrell was still standing there empty-handed. He turned when Harry entered. The performance was entirely gone. No stammer, no nervous warmth, nothing of the Quirrell who taught defense against the dark arts with the inadequacy of deliberate containment. What was looking out of Quirrell's face now was something else, and it didn't bother pretending otherwise. Harry Potter, Quirrell said, in his normal voice, which was clear and measured and carried the quality of someone who hadn't needed the performance for a long time and was relieved to drop it. I wondered how long it would take you. Not very long, Harry said. He stopped 12 feet away and looked at Quirrell with the full attention he gave to things he needed to understand completely. You've known, Quirrell said. Since September. Something moved in Quirrell's face. Not quite the depth charge thing Harry had been seeing for months, more direct than that, more surface. The thing that lived behind Quirrell's face wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. He said you were clever. He said it with, I'm not sure he meant it entirely as a compliment. He's right, either way, Harry said. Where is he? Is he comfortable in there? Quirrell blinked. It was, apparently, not the question he'd expected. Comfortable. You know what I mean. Is the arrangement still what it was, or has it become something more compulsory at this point? Quirrell was quiet for a moment. Something moved through him, not the depth charge but something more complicated, more personal. That's a very strange thing to ask. I'm asking because I want to understand what I'm actually dealing with, Harry said. Two people or one? And which one is making the decisions right now? We are in agreement, Quirrell said, but the way he said it had a quality of something recently decided rather than long settled. We want the same thing. The stone, Harry said. For Voldemort to come back properly. He said the name the way he always said it, without the flinch that most people couldn't suppress, and Quirrell's eyes, Quirrell's, not the other things, did something quick at the sound of it. And what do you get out of it, Professor? That's the part one haven't been able to nail down. Power, Quirrell said. Recognition. He stopped. You were passed over, Harry said, not unkindly. Underestimated. You've been in this school for years and you're more capable than anyone here knows and none of it was acknowledged. He watched Quirrell's face. He told you that. And he was probably right. Quirrell's eyes were doing something that Harry recognized from a very different context, the recognition of being seen. The specific vulnerability of someone who'd believed a thing about themselves in private for years and has just heard someone else say it. Don't, Quirrell said. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Harry said. I'm telling you what I see, which is what I do. You are probably genuinely capable. And what he offered you was real, in the sense that he's actually powerful and he actually meant it. Harry kept his eyes on Quirrell's. But you understand, I think you understand, that he doesn't share power. He demonstrates it by having people serve him. That's not the same thing. The room was very still. I know what he is, Quirrell said, quietly, in a way that was the most honestly Quirrell had sounded in this entire conversation. I knew when I agreed. Then why? A pause. Long enough to be real. Because being nobody for 40 years is its own kind of dying, Quirrell said. Harry sat with that. He didn't dismiss it. It was true, in its way, not a justification, but a real thing, the specific desperation of a person who felt invisible for long enough that they'd take a terrible option to feel otherwise. I understand that, Harry said. More than you might think. Something shifted in Quirrell's posture. Then the voice came. It came from everywhere and nowhere, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees simultaneously, and it was not Quirrell's voice and not quite a human voice either, the voice of something that had been distilled past most of the mortal components, what remained when you'd cut away everything that made you limited in the service of making yourself limitless. Harry Potter. The voice was curious. Genuinely, unmistakably curious. I've been waiting to do this properly. Hello, Harry said. A pause. You're not afraid. No. Interesting. The voice moved around the room in a way that sound from a single source shouldn't. Most people are afraid before I've done anything at all. It's almost tedious. I imagine it would be, Harry said. Fear that's automatic isn't really information. It doesn't tell you anything about the actual situation. Another pause. You've thought about me. Quite a lot, yes. You're an interesting problem. The temperature dropped again. A problem. The word came with something that might have been amusement or might have been the register amusement left in a voice that had given up most human things. That's one way to put it. You're a fragment of a person who made a series of choices in the direction of immortality and ended up less than you started with, Harry said. That's factually accurate. And the stone, what you'd get from the stone, is more of the same. More time, in a body that isn't yours, doing more of the thing that's gotten you here. He paused. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm telling you what I see. What do you want, Harry? The voice was settling into something. It had been assessing, in its way, and now it was arriving somewhere. You could have sent an adult. Dumbledore. Instead you came yourself. Dumbledore couldn't have gotten the stone from the mirror, Harry said. No. He couldn't. A pause. And you believe you can? I think so. Yes. Because you don't want it for yourself. No. What do you want, then? The question had a different quality now, still dangerous, still the voice of something that had killed more than Harry could count and would again without hesitation, but also, listening. Genuinely listening, the way you listened to something that surprised you. What does Harry Potter actually want? Harry looked at the mirror. He'd been thinking about this for months. What he would see in it, if he looked. He thought about the question underneath the question. The mirror of Eriste showed you your deepest desire, and his deepest desire was a thing he'd been working out the shape of since a cracked phone on a mattress and 47,000 viewers and Grace's yellow oilcloth kitchen and Sirius's unsteady handwriting on thin paper. He stepped up to the mirror and looked. He saw, himself. But not himself as he was. Himself as something wider, something that had grown into more room than he currently occupied, surrounded not by a vision of his parents alive or wealth or fame or any of the things the mirror might offer, but by the simple, complicated picture of a world that had its structural failures addressed. Proper accountability. Sirius free and known to him. Neville confident. The wizarding world's governance reformed. The house elf situation remedied. The Muggle and magical worlds in honest relationship rather than mutual ignorance. Not a wish. A plan. His deepest desire was the version of the future where all the work he'd been doing mattered. The stone appeared in his hand. He felt it before he looked down, a warmth that was different from the wand's warmth, older, denser, containing something that was not quite alive but was very far from inert. He closed his fingers around it. I have it, he said, to the room. Quirrell spun toward him. The voice came cold and absolute. Bring it here, Harry. You understand that I could simply take it. You can't, Harry said. You can't touch me. You know that. He looked at Quirrell. He knows that. The protection my mother left, whatever it is exactly, however it works, it means direct contact with me causes you harm. That's why you've been talking instead of acting. Silence. I've read everything I could find about sacrificial magical protection, Harry said. It's not complete, the research, but the principle is clear enough. Love as a magical force is something you didn't calculate for, because it's not the kind of thing you can calculate for from the outside. You have to have experienced it. Very clever. The voice was controlled. Very controlled. And the stone? Goes back to Nicholas Flamel, Harry said. Who I'll write to next week about the situation. He can decide what he'd like done with it. He paused. And you, whatever you are now, whatever fraction of a person you've become, I'm not going to destroy you, because that's not my decision to make, and because you're not currently in a position to cause harm that can't be managed. But I am going to make sure that what happened in 1981 is fully investigated. All of it. Including the people who helped you, who covered for you, who made sure you had allies in positions of power afterward. You think you can manage me? I think I can account for you, Harry said. Which is different. Managing implies control. Accounting implies record. And the record is the thing that matters. A long silence. Then Quirrell moved. He crossed the 12 feet between them fast, with the desperate speed of someone who'd made a decision and was committed to it, and he reached for Harry's hand, for the stone, with both of his own. Harry had been expecting it. Not the specific moment, but the move. Quirrell's desperation had been building through the entire conversation, the negotiation between host and passenger deteriorating as the conversation went on without producing what either of them needed. When the desperation finally broke through the strategy, it would be physical, because physical was all that was left. He stepped back and redirected Quirrell's momentum with his left hand on Quirrell's outstretched arm, a simple mechanical thing, redirecting force rather than blocking it, and Quirrell stumbled past him, and where Quirrell's hand had brushed Harry's wrist, the skin cracked. Not Harry's skin. Quirrell's. Quirrell looked at his hand. At the fissures spreading from where he'd touched Harry, the skin going grey and then silver and then something that wasn't quite either. He made a sound that was, for a moment, completely himself, not the voice that lived behind him, not the performance, just Quirrell, looking at his hand. "I'm sorry," Harry said, and meant it in the specific and limited way of someone who is genuinely sorry about the collateral of something unavoidable. Quirrell reached for him again, and this time when Harry caught his wrist it was deliberate, both of Harry's hands holding Quirrell's, and the effect was immediate and total, Quirrell's face going through something that was agony and release in equal measure, the depth charge thing surfacing fully and then dissolving, the grey-silver spreading up his arms, and then Dumbledore was in the room. Harry didn't know how. He didn't question it. He dropped Quirrell's hands and stepped back and Dumbledore moved past him to where Quirrell was collapsing, moving with the specific intentionality of someone who knew exactly what was happening and what the next 10 seconds required. "Harry," Dumbledore said, without turning. "Are you hurt?" "No," Harry said. "The stone." Harry opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm, warm and impossible, the thing that Flamel had made and that Voldemort had wanted and that Harry had walked through 6 protection chambers and 1 direct confrontation to hold. "I'll take that," Dumbledore said, and the gentleness in his voice was the gentleness of someone handling something that is very precious and very dangerous and very much not a thing for a child to hold longer than necessary. Harry passed it over. Quirrell was on the floor. He was, not well. The interaction with Harry's protection had done something permanent to him, Harry could see that, and Dumbledore was kneeling over him with his wand out, doing something careful and focused that Harry watched without interrupting because it was not his intervention to make. He looked at Quirrell's face while Dumbledore worked. The thing that had been behind it was gone. Whatever fragment of Voldemort had been there, hosted there, pressed against the inside of Quirrell's existence for months, years, since the sabbatical abroad that had changed his face, it wasn't there anymore. Quirrell's face was just his face. It looked, for the first time Harry had ever seen it, simply tired. "He'll live," Dumbledore said quietly. "But he will need significant care." "He chose it," Harry said. "But I think the reasons he chose it were real." Dumbledore looked at him over Quirrell's still form. "Yes," he said. "They generally are." The hospital wing smelled of dittany and something herby that Harry hadn't identified yet, and Madame Pomfrey had the energy of someone who wanted to fuss and was being prevented, which she directed into a series of diagnostic charms and a pronounced expression of professional displeasure at the whole situation. Harry sat on the bed and let her run them. Dumbledore sat in a chair beside the bed and they looked at each other across the quiet room with the look of 2 people who have just been through something and are in the processing stage. "The stone," Harry said. "Safe. And Quirrell?" "In the care of the appropriate healers." A pause. "He is not a bad man, Harry. He is a man who made a catastrophic choice from a recognizable human place." "I know," Harry said. "I told him I understood the invisible thing. The being nobody." Dumbledore looked at him. "Did you mean it?" "Mostly. The experience was different. But the mechanism, yes. I understand what it does to a person, over a long time." Dumbledore was quiet. Outside the window, the Hogwarts grounds were beginning to lighten, the very early beginning of dawn, the sky going from black to the specific blue that came before color. "The voice," Harry said. "Voldemort. What happened to it?" "The fragment is dispersed," Dumbledore said. The direct interaction with you, the protection's effect, would have been significant for something as attenuated as he had become. He is not gone, not entirely. I don't believe that's possible in the current situation. But he is, diminished further. Driven back. To where? Somewhere. Waiting. He is very patient when he has to be. We need to use the time, Harry said. The year he's diminished, the political work, the documentation, making sure the people who enabled him last time are on record. The Ministry's memory of 1981 is selective. I've been reading the Wisengamot records and there are gaps that look like what happened to my parents' will. Someone went through and made things convenient. Dumbledore nodded. There was no surprise in it. I know. You've known for years, Harry said. Not as an accusation. A fact. Yes. And you haven't done anything about it because exposing it requires evidence that can't be explained away, Dumbledore said, and because the people who would need to investigate it are, in some cases, the people who created the gaps. He paused. And because I have operated for a very long time on the assumption that I am the right person to determine when things are ready to be addressed. That assumption has not always served well. No, Harry said. It hasn't. They sat with that. I want to help with it, Harry said. The political side. The accountability. I've been corresponding with Perkins at the DMLE for 2 years and I think there are things that can be moved if they're approached correctly. He looked at Dumbledore. But I need you to be honest with me about what you know. All of it. Including the things you've been deciding I'm not ready for. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The dawn was advancing outside, the sky going from blue to gold. There is one thing, Dumbledore said, that I have been, the most reluctant to tell you. Not because I don't think you can handle it. Because the knowing of it changes something, and I wanted you to have time before that change. Harry waited. The night Voldemort came for your parents, Dumbledore said, he came with a specific intention that went beyond the war. There is a prophecy. One that describes a child born at the end of July with the power to oppose him. He heard part of it and acted on it. He paused. The prophecy refers to you. And it contains a line that says that neither can live while the other survives. The room was quiet. Harry sat with it. Turned it over. Set it down from different angles. Neither can live while the other survives, he said. Yes. That's not the same as one of us has to kill the other, Harry said. Survive means, it's ambiguous. It could mean as long as the other has any power, any presence, any ability to act. It doesn't necessarily specify death as the mechanism. Dumbledore blinked. Most people, when they hear it, most people hear kill, Harry said. I hear survive. Those are different words. He thought about it. It means the situation as it stands can't persist indefinitely. It will resolve. But the resolution isn't specified. He looked at Dumbledore. And prophecies aren't instructions. They're self-fulfilling if you let them be. Voldemort heard it and acted on it, and that action created the conditions for the prophecy to be relevant. If he hadn't moved, it might have referred to someone else entirely. Dumbledore's expression was doing the thing it had done in their first meeting at Blackwood and Associates, that complicated, unguarded look, the one that appeared when Harry said something that reorganized the weight of things. Yes, Dumbledore said quietly. Precisely that. That's exactly right. So the prophecy is real, but it's not a sentence, Harry said. It's a description of a situation. Which means the situation is what needs to change, not just the people in it. You understand it better in 5 minutes than I have in 10 years, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite wonder and not quite grief and was probably both. You understood it fine, Harry said. You just couldn't help treating it like a sentence because you love me and it felt like a death notice. He paused. That's actually very human of you. Dumbledore made a sound that was very close to a laugh, surprised out of him, unguarded. Harry looked out the window at the spreading dawn. The grounds were visible now, the lake going silver, the forest dark at the edges, the Quidditch pitch in the middle distance. A world full of things that needed doing, structured correctly, accounted for, built into something better than what they'd been. "I'm going to be here for 6 more years," Harry said. "I'm going to learn everything there is to learn. I'm going to work on the ministry accountability question with Perkins. I'm going to make sure Sirius has proper support when he gets out. I'm going to help Neville figure out who he is. I'm going to finish Hermione's argument about Muggle-born representation in the Wizengamot with her, because she's right and we need the legislative mechanism." He paused. "And when Voldemort comes back properly, because he will, I'll be ready. Not because of the prophecy. Because I decided to be." Dumbledore looked at him across the hospital wing, in the early morning light, with the full weight of 80+ years of caring about the world and getting things wrong and still trying, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Harry Potter sat in the bed in the hospital wing of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and thought about what came next with the same clarity he'd thought about everything that had come before it. The cracked phone. The live stream. Grace's kitchen. The train. The castle. The chambers below. The mirror that had shown him not a wish but a plan. He was 11 years old. He had 6 years ahead of him in this school, 6 years in which the wizarding world would become his the way the Muggle one already was, not by inheritance or prophecy or anyone else's permission, but by understanding and effort and the specific fierce patience of someone who knew that real change was slow and structural and had to be built. Madame Pomfrey came back with a potion and a look that suggested Harry would drink it or answer for the consequences, which he respected, and he drank it. It tasted of something sweet and slightly medicinal and settled warmth into his chest like Grace's very milky tea. He lay back on the pillow. Outside, the sun was up properly now, and Hogwarts was catching it the way it always caught things, enormously, fully, without reservation, the towers going gold and the lake going gold and the whole improbable magnificent place doing what it had done for centuries in the early morning. He thought about Sirius, free, or about to be. He thought about a letter he'd write when he was recovered, a real letter this time, not official, not through FOSS or legal channels. A letter that said, "Come and meet me. I want to know you properly. I want you to see what we've been building." He thought about Grace with her pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe. He thought about Marcus and Priya, about Mr. Pharaoh and the Magna Carta, about Jennifer Cole's pen moving fast, about Webb's serious furniture building and old paper smell, about Ms. Onan's careful voice and the specific look she had when she was managing her own reaction to something that mattered. He thought about all of them out there, in Guildford, in London, in the Muggle world running parallel to this one, holding the threads he'd passed them, doing the work that connected his world and this one in the ways that both needed connecting. He thought about a piece of cracked glass throwing a tiny rainbow across grey pavement on a Tuesday in July, and a small boy who'd stopped and looked at it, and made a decision. Every single thing, forward from that. He closed his eyes. He slept, and he didn't dream of anything frightening, and when he woke, the sun was high and the world was entirely full of work left to do, which was exactly how he liked it.